All right. On the screen here, you can see our sort of outline for the day. I'll be giving you a little bit of a brief history. We'll be talking about why we have MPOs and what their main role and responsibilities are. We'll be talking about the various partners and funding sources that come into play, giving you an overview of the programs and the different processes and protocols we have here at the MPO. We'll be talking to you about public transportation and specifically Wake Transit because of how much of a huge part of public transportation funding and planning that it has become in the region. And then we'll be trying to relate some of this to all of you and helping you to understand how you can be successful at Campo. You'll also notice throughout the day a couple of icons that'll be on the screen. The one on the left there at the bottom looks like a little computer. That's where it's denoting that there's some sort of resource online that you can learn more about the information. And then the one on the right there is trying to help you understand where there's an opportunity for you to get involved in a process or a program or whatever it is. I will say at the outset, your success being involved with Campo is 100% dependent on your level of participation, right? So if you're very hands-off, there's not going to be much happening, right? If you are hands-on and you are involved, and I encourage you to maybe network during the breaks with some of your counterparts at the staff or elected official level, and I'm sure they will tell you the more involved you are, the more successful you will be with regional transportation planning and programming and funding. All right, so we'll get rolling here, and we'll start with the history of the MPOs. Sort of at the dawn of time for MPOs, that being in the 50s and 60s, that coincided with a lot of growth after World War II here in the U.S. Lots of transportation needs were popping up, especially as suburbanization was starting to happen. And more money was going into the transportation network, specifically highways. There were a successive number of highway bills that were passed at the federal level. States were beginning to dedicate funding for specifically for transportation, and folks were beginning to say, "Hey, we want to have a say in where that money goes and how it works." And so MPOs were created in order to help make that happen. And over time, the role of the MPOs around the country has increased significantly, and the requirements that regions have to meet in order to utilize those transportation funds has increased and evolved, a lot. Campo was founded, I believe, in 1968, and is one of about 430 of these MPOs, these organizations that are found throughout the country. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we step through this. But what is an MPO? An MPO is a regional transportation policy and planning organization. It's federally mandated for any area of the country that the census has defined as having an urbanized area of at least 50,000 people. So once you have a census urbanized area of 50,000 people or more, you're going to have to create an MPO or join an MPO if there's already one that exists. It's made up of representatives from local governments and other interested stakeholders and governmental transportation related authorities. And the primary role is to conduct the 3C planning process, which is the continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive planning process. And those words are underlined for a reason. In federal law, there is very specific definitions for each of those three words, and we're not going to get into the specifics of that today, but suffice to say that the definition of those three words might not be what you think it actually is in federal law. So it's important to understand that there is a well-defined role and responsibility for the MPOs. So MPO boundaries, as I was saying a moment ago, are defined by the urbanized area, which is set by the census, usually once every 10 years. And an MPO is required to include all of that urbanized area, as well as the area that is anticipated to urbanize within the next 20 years. So the minimum definition is that urbanized area, and that's pretty straightforward. It's whatever the census says it is. And then after that, what might urbanize in the next 20 years that's definitely a little bit of a gray area. You can make an argument sometimes one way or the other whether something will grow and become urbanized or not. And so most MPOs tend to go, be conservative from the standpoint of being a little bit larger than a little bit smaller in order to ensure that they include all of that area. And the main reason for that is to make sure that we're trying to get ahead of things and plan for that future and be ready when the growth does come with what we need to do in terms of transportation improvements. So, on the screen, you can see all the different colors there are the urbanized areas within I guess, Eastern Piedmont or Research Triangle region, going all the way over to Greensboro. And then it might be a little hard to see here in the room, but online maybe a little easier. There's a darker, gray color and then a white background. The white background are the MPO boundaries on this map. But you can see in the case of Campo, where we are primarily the green urbanized area. That's the Raleigh-Cary urbanized area. And then also the Clayton Archer Lodge urbanized area, and then a couple of smaller ones with Wendell and Zebulon and in the east. The white background behind that is quite a bit larger, and that's to denote those are the areas that we anticipate could become urbanized over the next 20 years. So, as I said earlier, throughout the entire United States, there's, I think, about 430 MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations. Here in North Carolina, there are 20. Now, one of those is a bi-state MPO. It's the Myrtle Beach MPO, and the majority of that MPO is down in South Carolina, but it does cross into North Carolina, down there in the bottom center of that map. In North Carolina, as in many other states, over the years, there has been a need for non-metropolitan transportation planning. And so in the early 2000s, at the state level, RPOs or rural planning organizations were created, and there are 18 here in North Carolina. Pretty much any area in an MPO is in an RPO. So you're either in an MPO or in an RPO, and we try to work together with our neighbors, whether they're an MPO or an RPO, to make sure that there's seamless transportation planning happening. So there are 5 core functions for each MPO, and they're up here on the screen now. To establish a fair and impartial setting, we always like to say here at Campo that we are you and you are us. That is what an MPO is. It's the collective of all of the member jurisdictions and agencies that are a part of that MPO. One of those other functions is to evaluate transportation alternatives, generally in a technical fashion, but also in qualitative ways as well. To develop and maintain a regional transportation plan called the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or MTP. To develop a transportation improvement program, or TIP. So how many of you in the room have heard of something called the TIP? Raise your hand. How many of you think that is something that NCDOT does? NCDOT developed something called the STIP, or STIP, that's the State Transportation Improvement Program. Each MPO develops a TIP, or TIP. And the purpose of that is that, and you'll learn more about this a little later today, but just real quick in a nutshell, those two documents have to match. It is how the federal government recognizes that everyone is in agreement for a project to be able to move forward and get built, right? It's how we have our say ultimately and officially in transportation funding. And then the last one there on the right is involving the public and interested in key stakeholders. And while that's the last one I mentioned, it's actually a very important thing, and we spend a lot of time trying to do that across all sorts of activities that we have here at the MPO. So there are 3, I guess, key activities that we do on a pretty regular basis. And if we don't keep these up to date and active, that's when, we can have some problems with transportation projects moving forward through design and ultimately to construction. The first 2, I already just mentioned, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and the TIP. The third one there, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS. We'll refer to that as air quality conformity, or AQ conformity. That is the set of state and federal regulations that ensure that the projects that are selected for funding that are getting built are not causing additional harm in terms of air quality, which is one of the primary environmental impacts of transportation. So maybe a little more specifically for Campo, Campo includes all of Wake County and then parts of 5 other counties: Granville, Franklin, Johnston, Harnett, and Chatham, Eastern Chatham. You can see the map up there on the screen. Pretty large area. I think we are the largest MPO in North Carolina by area. We are second largest by total population. 2024 population, we have about 1.5 million people in Campo. The MPO in the Charlotte area has us beat out by, I think it's about 90,000 people. 5 or 10 years ago, that was closer to 150,000 people. So we are quickly catching up, and one day we'll be the largest by area and by population. And I don't know if we get an award for that or not, but that seems to be the way things are going. So our MPO structure at the top, it's the Campo Executive Board. So commissioner, the mayors that are in the room, some of the other commissioners and councilors that are in the room, the elected officials, they sit on that board, and that is the governing board for the MPO. To help them make their decisions, you have a professional staff, and that's several of the folks you've already been introduced to. You also have what's called the Technical Coordinating Committee. So many of the staff or key staff involved in transportation in your agency or your jurisdiction will tend to be members of that TCC. And then we also have the local councils and other committees that will provide feedback either through staff and administration or directly to the elected officials that are members of our board. So our executive board meets monthly. It meets on the 3rd Wednesday of each month at 3 p.m. It is, again, the decision-making body for the MPO. The Technical Coordinating Committee meets on the 1st Thursday of each month at 10 a.m. Both have their meetings in this room generally. And again, they are generally agency staff and provide technical recommendations and advice to the executive board. So the typical process for our agenda cycle is an agenda item will go to the TCC. They will consider and provide a recommendation to the executive board on that item, and then the executive board would vote and take action on that item. Here on the Campo staff, we have 25 staff, and you can see from the list on the screen a very diverse group. We have several transportation planners. We have technical traffic forecast modelers. We have in public engagement staff. We have transit-focused staff. I think that covers most, and then we have administrative staff. So that covers most of the categories there. And believe it or not, even with 25 on staff, by the sort of rule of thumb for MPOs, we are understaffed. Generally, they say 1 staff member for every 50,000 population. So if you do the math, we'd have a few more on staff. So we try to be very efficient and very effective with the resources we have. And our staff has grown over the last few years because we were even more understaffed than in the past. So every few years, the executive board will conduct a strategic plan, and then we'll do an organizational study to ensure that we are staffed appropriately and organized appropriately to implement that strategic plan. Speaking of the strategic plan, we have one that I think we'll be looking to maybe 2 more years to update that, 2 more fiscal years to update that. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see our strategic focus areas. That's public engagement, partnering with others, educating elected officials, providing policy leadership, and operational excellence. On the right-hand side, you can see how where our focus areas are to operationalize that. And you can see there are several there, many of which are in the transportation realm, key topics and hot issues perennially. So continuing to work in a lot of those areas to make sure that we get our goals and objectives as a region accomplished. And am I running the video, Bonnie? I can't remember if I'm doing it or they're doing it.
Yeah, try to click it.
Oh, it won't work from here because I'm in WebEx.
Oh, wait.
Can you run it from there? So we have a quick video just about how land use and transportation are connected. That's talked a lot about at the staff level, but for elected officials, some of you, especially if you're newly elected, you may not have heard this or seen something like this before. So we'll go ahead and run it for you.
The mission of the Urban Land Institute is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. ULI Triangle supports this mission through our efforts in education, partnering with local governments and institutions, and through the efforts of our members in research and developing ideas around land use and building community. There are rules and embedded practices that are invisible to most people but shape our world in profound ways. Zoning, parking requirements, building codes are all examples. One of these is the Traffic Impact Analysis, or TIA, process. When a large new development is proposed, local governments typically require an analysis of the traffic impacts. There is a standard process. Future trips from a development are estimated by looking up trip generation numbers for each of the proposed land uses. These trips are distributed and added to existing traffic on the street network, and a computer model estimates how much additional delay will occur during peak travel times at nearby intersections. The amount of delay is called level of service, or LOS, and it can range from A to F. What if the delay, or LOS, predicted by the model is considered unacceptable? Typically, there are two responses. Downsizing the development can reduce the trips, or capacity can be added to the intersection with more turn lanes, which means the intersection gets wider. These responses may address the localized traffic impact, but what is the cumulative impact of applying these two mitigations over and over again? Development sprawls further out, and streets become ever more difficult for pedestrians, cyclists, and transit riders to negotiate. The very things that seek to reduce traffic locally may increase it regionally by lengthening travel distances and making other modes of transportation increasingly unattractive or impractical. What if there was another way of looking at transportation impacts? There is. It's called VMT, which stands for Vehicle Miles Traveled. Instead of examining delay at local intersections, VMT analysis asks a different question. How many miles of automobile travel will be added to the street and highway network if this project is built? This may sound like a minor distinction, but it can produce a dramatically different conclusion about impacts. Let's look at some examples. This subdivision on an undeveloped woodland is located in an area with low traffic volumes. There is plenty of capacity at nearby intersections to absorb additional car trips, so it passes an LOS test with flying colors. But it is far from job centers, retail, and services, so the residents will have to drive, and drive far to access their basic needs. From a VMT perspective, it has an outsized impact. This 6-story mixed-use building is located at a high-traffic intersection adjacent to a busy shopping center. While new trips might further congest the intersection, the residents of this building are a short walk from groceries, dining, shopping, and other day-to-day needs. The location is a short bike or drive to major job centers, served by bike share, and the building is also served by 2 bus routes. While a traditional LOS analysis might recommend limiting the amount of new housing in this location, from a VMT perspective, the more regional growth that can be directed to places like this, the better. Further, the anticipated congestion may never occur. Real-world traffic counts post-development often do not show the growth in traffic volumes that the models predict. As a metric, VMT is much more aligned with the climate goals set by Triangle local governments. Unlike LOS, VMT has a direct relationship to how much fuel is burned by personal vehicles. Transportation accounts for over 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in Raleigh. What stands in the way of a broader switch to VMT? One factor is inertia. The LOS method has been an industry standard for decades. Engineering firms know how to produce the analysis, and transportation staff know how to review it. A second is methodology. Estimating VMT is harder than LOS, requiring more data and more complex models. Third, when a project is subject to public review, most interest comes from nearby neighbors who naturally focus on the immediate issues surrounding the site rather than the broader issues for the region. Fortunately, the science of VMT has made great strides, in part because California, the largest state, implemented a switch from LOS to VMT as part of state-mandated environmental quality reviews. Since so many projects in California are subject to environmental review, traffic engineers have had to quickly build and refine their models. The physicist John Wheeler once said, "We make the world by the questions we ask." LOS asked the question, how can we keep this intersection flowing freely? The usual answer to this question, wide roads and low densities, hasn't worked out in practice as a region grows. VMT asks a different question, which is, how can we create a world where people drive less? It turns out the answer to this question, mixed uses, build more densely, provide travel options, not only reflects where market demand is headed, but also what is needed to build more sustainably. Join us on February 9th at 1 p.m. to explore the California experience with VMT analysis and its implications for the Triangle, with 2 speakers from California representing practice and academia, followed by a panel discussion with local leaders and developers. Finally, a special thanks to the ULI Triangle Transportation and Infrastructure Committee team who spent countless hours developing this program and producing this video. ULI's strength comes from the commitment and volunteer spirit of its members. If you have any questions or would like additional information, please contact ULI Triangle's Executive Director, Robin Hilliard, at robin.hilliard@uli.org.
Okay.
You voting on that?
Not today. I don't think we have a quorum. All right. So are we back, Daniel? We're good? All right. So good video to help understand how, I think in a lot of different ways, not just for development, but you all are here representing your local jurisdiction, but you've stepped into a regional forum, right? And I think one of the things that has always been really good about Campo is while we're made up of individual different local jurisdictions, we've found success through partnership and through supporting one another. And I think if any of the newer folks talk to any of the older folks, you'll find that happens on a pretty regular basis. And not just on the easy stuff, on the hard stuff too. So just wanted to maybe underline that a little bit here since we just had that video, but I think it's a really important part of how our region has found success. The other way our region has found success is through partnership. Almost everything here in the Triangle has some kind of partnership, right? We are a unique region in that we don't have one single dominant central city. Raleigh is very big, but they are the largest municipality in our region. But there are a lot of other municipalities and jurisdictions in the region. And so we have found success, not just in transportation, but whether it's water, parks, whatever it is, through partnership. So in terms of transportation, who else is involved, right? Besides those that are actually formally members or voting members for the MPO. You can see it up there on the screen. It's other elected officials, various state and federal agencies, transit operators, the private sector, and the public, right? And then various interest groups that are out there. How many of you have heard of the Regional Transportation Alliance? How many of you have heard of Wake Up Wake County or ULI? All right, those are just a few, and there are a lot of other ones out there. So you are a partner, whether you are a designated member to one of the Campo boards or just a local elected official or staff member involved in transportation. You all are the MPO. Again, you are us and we are you, right? So our board members and our TCC members, they represent you here formally. Part of that role is to distribute, coordinate, and also collect information from within your community and bring it to the regional setting. It's also to take those regional issues, that regional context, and bring it back to your local community. In addition to those monthly meetings, we do a lot of different activities, programs, studies, whatever it may be. You'll learn more about some of those here later today. But for each one of those, we tend to have some sort of stakeholder group or groups, as well as technical teams that work on those activities. It might be a corridor study, in which case we would have a stakeholder group that might have elected officials, that might have members of the public on it, and then we'll have a technical team, and that's generally going to have staff from NCDOT and from the local jurisdiction to help guide the development of the recommendations that come out of those activities. Again, we also have the transportation policy priorities. That is sort of in the transportation realm, those policy priorities that we collectively have said are important to everyone. It might not have the thing that's most important to you or your jurisdiction on there, and it might have something that you don't fully support. But as a region, these are those things that everyone could agree on that we can all move forward together with. Some of our other partners throughout the region include the Triangle West Transportation Planning Organization, formerly known as DCHC MPO, if some of you have heard that in the past. It's been a few years since they changed their name, but that is the same entity. They are the MPO on the western side of the triangle. So on the map there, hopefully by now you can kind of recognize the Campo shape, or capillary MPO as it's labeled on the map, and then the Triangle West TPO. And yes, Campo is about 70% of that area, and Triangle West is about 30%. That's roughly rough percentages there. But we do a lot together. It's important because, as many of you know, the county line or the municipal boundary is an imaginary line on a map, right? Just like MPO boundaries are. The general public, they might live in Wake County and work in Durham County and vice versa. If they cross that county line, they are crossing from one MPO into the other MPO. So it makes sense that we work together to we don't want I-40 to do this. We want it to do this, right? And when I talk to the general public and they say, well, what does an MPO do? That's kind of how I talk to them about it. We do primarily two things. We function as a traffic cop, right? To make sure if there's a disagreement somewhere or folks aren't seeing eye to eye, that we get them to work together. And then we also make sure that if Morrisville and Cary are planning to build a new road or a sidewalk or a new transit route, that they connect at their boundary. They don't do this, right? It seems pretty silly and pretty simple, but you'd be surprised over the years, especially in the more distant past, how much we've had to stop everyone collectively and say, hey, wait a minute, let's make sure we all get on the same page, right? We also have, as I mentioned earlier, we have to deal with air quality and air quality conformity. The conformity process is the process we go through to demonstrate that the transportation improvements that we plan to make will not have an adverse impact on air quality. And so on the map on the screen, you can see that red dotted line, which is much larger. That is the air quality region that we are in. And so there's even more than the two MPOs that have to work together to make sure that air quality does not get worse in the triangle. We also partner with a few other organizations we'll run through here as we go through to make sure that we accomplish these regional goals. So why do we do all this partnering? Why do we do all this working together? And I think this is a really good map to show you. Just from work trips alone, there is a lot of travel in between the various counties and jurisdictions in the region, right? A lot. And there is a lot more, if you were to look at this for the Charlotte region, most of those folks are going into Mecklenburg and then they're going out for Mecklenburg, right? In the morning and in the afternoon. Here in the Triangle, I kind of sometimes say it's scattershot. So we have a lot of people who maybe they work in Raleigh or they work in Durham or they work in Wake Forest and they live in Garner, right? Or they live in Holly Springs or in Fuquay or something like that. So we don't have one single dominant commute pattern. We have several very strong commute patterns throughout the region. So it's really important that we all work together to recognize that the places where people maybe work isn't where they live or isn't where they play. It'd be great if everyone lived, worked, and played in the same location, right? But that's not how most people make their choices on where they're gonna live their lives. Well, another important partner we have here in the region is Central Pines Regional Council. They're one of the several council of governments here in North Carolina. They are a regional planning and coordinating agency. They do a lot of work in a lot of other areas outside of transportation. They do some in transportation as well. The Triangle Area RPO is housed at Central Pines Regional Council, and they also do a lot of work to help coordinate between Campo and the Triangle West TPO. So they help with our regional plan development. They help with administering and overseeing the region's transportation demand management program. And they help with, sorry, folks online, I don't know that the slide advanced for you. Let me go back and forth here real quick. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the WebEx guys, but the slides online are not advancing. We'll keep going and hopefully we can figure that out. But so they also do a lot on the land use front, on water quality, and on housing. They do a lot of coordination in those areas. In North Carolina, MPOs do not have a formal role or responsibility for land use or housing decisions. Those are generally local decisions. But the role everyone has decided they want Campo to have is to try and educate and coordinate, especially with that connection between land use decisions and transportation impacts and vice versa. I mentioned the RPOs a little bit, but just to talk a little bit more about them, in 1998, federal law said, hey, even for the rural areas, you need to have some sort of coordination and consultation process. You need to be talking to the locals. It's not just for the state to make all the decisions. So here in North Carolina, that began in the early 2000s when state statute was created RPOs here in the state. And again, they work in the rural areas. But we work with our RPO partners on a variety of different activities throughout the year. And at the bottom of the screen there, you can see our neighboring RPOs are the Curtar, the Mid-Carolina, I think I said Triangle Area, but they did rename to Central Pines RPO, and then the Upper Coastal Plain RPO. Another important partner we have here in the state for transportation is the State Department of Transportation, known as NCDOT. NCDOT, while it is one agency, in terms of partnership, I think anyone who works with them would tell you there are a variety of entities there than partners that you work with. So you have the statewide transportation planning division. They provide transportation planning support throughout the state, especially at a very high level. You have the local geographic divisions. So we have 4 divisions here that Campo is a part of, divisions 4, 5, 6, and 8. Occasionally we'll do some coordination with Division 7 because they cover, I think, Orange County, which is part of the Triangle West TPO. So time to time there'll be activities that we involve with them as well. The programming and funding coordination units at NCDOT are also very important, particularly if you have a locally managed project that has some state or federal funding. That's a whole different set of folks besides the local division or district office that you might be used to working with for development activity. The Integrated Mobility Division, that's a lot of the non-highway mode units at NCDOT. Project development, that's the folks that are working through design and environmental review for transportation projects. You have a lot of technical units that you may be involved in working with. The Turnpike Authority at one point was a totally separate state agency, but several years ago it was folded back into the Department of Transportation. I like to say that it's sort of like the enterprise arm of the State Department of Transportation. They have their own executive director. They have some of their own rules and protocols, but they are still integrated within the department and work very closely with all those other units. And then the Aviation Division and the Rail Division, I think those 2 units at NCDOT have really become, we have really begun to strengthen the partnership with those 2 units because of all the activity in the rail mode and in the aviation mode in the Triangle recently. I had asked earlier how many of you have heard of RTA, the Regional Transportation Alliance. If you've been to any one of their events in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, you know that the number one priority for the business community in the transportation realm is RDU, or the Raleigh-Durham International Airport. So it is a very timely issue that is impacting the economy here in the Triangle, and it is something that we have been working with all of those partners to further. A little bit more about NCDOT. NCDOT is responsible for an ever-growing amount of road mileage that is well on its way to 100,000 miles. It's over 80,000 already. It's the second most in the country, behind only the state of Texas, in terms of how many roads that the State Department of Transportation is responsible for. So many of you at the local level know that you have some local roads that you are responsible for, that your municipality maintains. And then there's the road network that the state maintains, some of which are the interstates and some of which are local cul-de-sacs out in the middle of a county somewhere. So it runs the whole gambit. NCDOT also distributes those federal funds that come to the state. Even the ones that are directed directly towards our region, they still flow through NCDOT. And they work with us for developing what those future transportation improvements are going to be, as well as working to understand and get input from the general public on transportation issues. NCDOT is broken up into several geographic units to help ensure that the unique nature of different parts of the state can be met. So there's 14 what are called divisions. Those are geographic areas of the state that are think of them essentially as NCDOT municipalities, if you will. So each one of those has a division engineer and a dedicated staff to work on issues within those areas of the state. Each division is broken up into several what are called districts. So particularly for local staff, if you have development activities happening, you're generally working with your district engineer or some of that staff. If you have a transportation project funded, you might be working with the division project engineer or project manager on those activities as well. We also have partners at the federal level. And one of the two primary partners there is the Federal Transit Administration. That is the unit at the federal level that's responsible for public transportation. That might be buses, it might be subways, it might be light rail, it might be bus rapid transit, monorails, people movers, all the things that you might think of as public transportation, whether we have it here in this state or not. Through the FTA, that is the entity at the federal level that federal public transportation funding will flow to our region and to the state. And as an example down there, you can see in the parentheses all those sections. Those are sections of federal law that designate specific funding programs. So for the transit agencies, one of the biggest ones there is Section 5307 as an example. That's a recurring pot of federal funds for public transportation activities. And then any sort of discretionary transit-related grant that our area might get is administered through the Federal Transit Administration, also known as FTA. Similar to the FTA, we also have on the roadway side the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA. They do two things that are important to us. One, on the funding side, and on the oversight of highway projects. This is the agency at the federal level that does that. They are also the agency that oversees the activities that we do here at the MPO. So once every 4 years, the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit will come in and do a full review of how we do what we do. And they will certify that the 3C planning process is being met. So we just had that happen last year in June. That process had been completed. So we got our signature of approval that we are meeting all federal requirements. And in 4 more years or 3.5 more years, we'll be sitting down with them again to go through that process. There's a variety of funding sources that we use for the planning activities we have. And you can see them up there on the screen. I'm going to run through these from left to right. PL funds are the primary funds we use for our MPO operations. We also have something called STBG PDA, or Surface Transportation Program Block Group funding. This funding is used, and the DA part stands for direct attributable. That's what we call it here in North Carolina. For those of you who might be coming to us from other states, sometimes that's called STP Regional or Regional Flex. That has different names in different states, but those are those federal funds that are directed to our region from the federal government. They have to be spent in our region. So we take some of those funds to help augment the funding we need for our operations, but the vast majority of those funds go into something called our LAP program, which Alex will talk about after one of the breaks, which is how we provide funding to the local jurisdictions or to the divisions to implement locally managed transportation projects. SPR funds, those are funds that are provided by the federal government to the state of North Carolina to do planning or research activities. We are generally not getting too much of the SPR funding. There's a state law that requires us to provide the non-federal match for those funds. But in the more rural areas, it's an important funding source for planning activities. We also, again, have a variety of transit funding sources that come to our region, both for operating transit systems, but also for planning for future transit. Sections 5307, 5310, 5339, those are a couple of examples there. And these are used by our transit agencies to do their short-term and long-term transit planning work. These are also funds like the PL funds or some of those STP DA funds that you will see if you look at our budget and work program document known as the UPWP. And Shelby will get into a little more detail on that as well later today. And then the final major source we have on there for planning activities is Wake Transit funding. So prior to 2017, we wouldn't have had that column on the screen there, but since the referendum and the establishment of the Wake Transit program and Wake Transit funding, the MPO has a fairly significant role in the activities that are required to make all of those transit improvements work well. And so there is funding, and we have some dedicated staff working on Wake Transit activities here. So I'm going to pause here. Any questions on all of that riveting information that we've provided you so far? Questions about funding sources, partners, any of those processes?
This is Bonnie for the folks online. If you have a question, please do raise your hand. So far, Chris, I'm not seeing any. Nothing in chat.
Nothing in chat. Good. Well, if you have a question along the way you think of, we'll have a couple other pauses today for questions. And of course, you're welcome to put it in the chat or email or come talk to us after the training today as well. All right, so let's get into some of our planning requirements. These are the things that all revolve around the key or primary functions we have, and that we are required to meet certain minimum standards when we're doing all of our activities. So the first key thing to understand here is that in the MPO world, there are really two categories of MPOs. There are the smaller MPOs. Those are that are populations of 50,000 to about 200,000. And then there's the MPOs that have a population over 200,000 people. If you're in an MPO that has a population over 200,000 people, that MPO is designated a transportation management area. And those areas get additional funding. They also have additional requirements they have to meet. And so we are required to have to meet performance measures. We're required to conduct a congestion management process. But we also do get additional funding to help us try to address the transportation challenges that we have at being a larger MPO. A little bit more about air quality and air quality conformity. Again, we partner with the Triangle West TPO for the development of our long-range transportation plan. We've been doing that since 2002, informally at first. Kind of a, hey, let's go see what kind of projects are you going to fund in the future? Here's what we're doing. But since 2009, we have developed the transportation plans that we are required to adopt jointly. So our staffs will meet biweekly throughout the plan development process to ensure that work is being done. It's not just being coordinated, but in some instances, you'll have Campo staff doing an activity for the entire triangle, and you'll have Triangle West staff doing an activity for the entire triangle. Our engagement staff work together to develop joint engagement activities and make sure that individual activities are coordinated. It's something that our region has been recognized nationally for over the years and continues to be recognized. I think we can get lulled into a sense of, oh, this is just how things work. But the reality is when we have new folks come into the MPO, whether it's with staff, elected officials, or local staff, we tend to get reminded from them that the partnership and cooperation that we enjoy here in the Triangle is not normal out there. It tends to be very different in other parts of the state or other parts of the country. So with many of you being new here, we do like to really emphasize that we have to work hard to keep that cooperation working together, but it's really important. And it has been a key component to the success and the high quality of life that we have here in the Triangle. Oh, and yes, this past Wednesday, our board took their final action on the 2055 version of our regional plan, the 2055 MTP. So that has been formally adopted. And I think next week it'll be shipped up to federal highways so that they can certify that it has met all the requirements. So within a month, that will all be wrapped up with a nice big bow. And then our staff and your local staffs will begin the effort to update the 2060 MTP. We say it's a 4-year cycle, and the day after we adopt the plan, we start on the next plan. One of the important and key requirements that we have being a larger MPO is called the Congestion Management Process, or CMP. This is a process where we have to demonstrate that we are doing the things that we feel like we can do to help address and manage growth of congestion. So this doesn't mean that we're necessarily stopping or reducing congestion, but that we're trying to do all the things that we can do to manage it. And obviously that word manage might mean different things to different people. So here at Campo, we take this CMP and it's embedded within or across a lot of different things that we do. All the special studies that we do, all the corridor studies or area studies, our regional plan, all of those things. But you can see on the screen there some of the key objectives for the CMP process. So it's not just about adding lanes. In fact, if you saw anything from that video a few minutes ago, if you just go add lanes or add capacity, you might end up actually creating more congestion, right? Depending on the situation. So it's focusing more on things like travel time reliability, improving more options for people to get where they're trying to get to. So improving public transit or non-motorized things like the bicycle and pedestrian network. It's improving safety and operational performance. Is a widening the right thing to do in a corridor to make it function better, or is it maybe timing up and synchronizing all of the traffic signals in that corridor? Which one will be the best solution for that corridor? The CMP process helps us to step through in an organized way to find those solutions. And one of the things we do, it also helps us monitor how we're doing. And so periodically we update something called the status of the system report. In fact, our TCC and our board just got a report, just got an update on the most recent update to the status of the system report earlier this week. And that also includes an annual congestion report card where we look at, in particular, our key bottlenecks or our top bottleneck areas and how are things how are things going in those areas from year to year? Are things getting better? Are things getting worse? Do we have an identified project that we can get funded to address those congestion issues? Well, the name of the game for MPOs is working together, right? To come to an agreement on how to improve transportation and the quality of life in our area. And so there, of course, when the feds say you have to do something, they create a requirement, they create a regulation. And so the statewide and metropolitan transportation planning consultation requirement is summarized there on the screen. It basically says that we will work with the state when we are working in areas like land use management, natural resource management, environmental protection, and historic preservation. So that's the thing that says you have to do it, even if you were already doing it. Now we're telling you have to do it. So thankfully in our area, we are doing a lot of these things already. Over the last 5 or 10 years, some of those newer requirements that have come out through federal regulations, when we've looked at them, we've said, oh, wait a minute, we're already doing that. Like, hey, that's a good thing, right? Not always, but many times. For example, about 10 years ago, a new requirement was created that there must be a public transportation representative on every MPO board. When we looked at it, we said, oh, good, Go Triangle is already a voting member of our board, so we're ahead of the curve on that. So we do like to see that we're either meeting those minimum requirements or exceeding those requirements, and even better if we're doing that ahead of time. One of the more recent changes in federal regulations are performance measures. And so starting also about 10 years ago, the federal government actually established formal performance measures to evaluate the effectiveness of the transportation solutions that we have and identified and implement within our area and within the state. And you can see several of those up on the screen there. They cover everything from maintenance and operations to congestion and safety and project delivery. And so the federal government has designated several performance measures that we are required to have. And then we work with the state, so we work with NCDOT to establish a target for each of those measures. And you can see the full list of our performance measures. So that's sort of the minimum, right? We have to have these are the federal ones. And then our region can have additional performance measures and targets if we choose to do so. Our region has chosen to do that. And in our MTP document and on our website, you can actually see the full list of all those performance measures and targets that we actually have. Some of them are aspirational. We have a couple of performance measures over the years that we've identified. And then when we've gone to try and figure out a target or and we may have set a target, and then we go in and say, well, there's not really a good way to measure this thing. Like how do we say this is important to us and everyone can agree on that, but we can't find a good data source to actually measure progress, right? So we're continually trying to sort of push ourselves to have use the yardsticks that we should to make sure that we're moving in the direction we want to move. The current federal legislation or federal law for transportation is referred to as IIJA. It was passed in 2021. When it was first passed, it was also called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill. So some of you may know it either as IIJA or bill, right? BIL. This is a continuation of prior federal transportation law. The previous one was known as the FAST Act. It included continuing formula program funding, like our STP funding or our PL funding. CMAQ funding is a continuation, those sorts of things. It also continued to require intermodal transportation planning to make sure we're looking at all the different modes, not just highway. It included reaffirmed the Safe Routes to School program and recreational trails. It did increase its focus and by extension, our focus in areas like safety and accessibility, particularly with new project development. It also had a lot of new language around climate change. It also increased overall transportation funding, which was a big thing. And so each year of this IIJA program, we have seen program funding, especially for those formula programs, Formula programs, by the way, are those funding programs from the federal government that are there every year. They're not discretionary. You don't have to submit a grant application necessarily. It's every year there's federal funds for that particular thing, right? Versus a discretionary program like the build program where there's money there every year under the law, but each year to get that money, you have to go in and apply and compete to get those funds. So our region gets a set amount of money each year from certain formula programs. And then, of course, our region is eligible to compete for other discretionary programs. Does everybody understand the difference there? Okay. Yes.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so the question here in the room was what's the proportion of overall transportation funding that's formula versus discretionary? That's a very good question. I've lost track of that in my head over the years, but the IIJA legislation significantly increased discretionary funding. And although it was passed and ratified and put into place in 2021, this federal fiscal year is the last year of IIJA. So this spring, actually all through the winter, in the headlines at the federal level, you've heard a lot about continuing resolutions and disagreements about this year's federal budget. In the background, reauthorization of the multi-year transportation funding program has been going on. So we are anticipating release of draft legislation here in the next month or two. That's what we're being told at the federal level. And the reason why this is important to answer your question is what we have heard, what we were being told by folks in Washington, D.C., is that the pendulum is going to shift and there will be, in the new legislation, more of the funding through the formula programs than the discretionary programs, right? And we don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. You know, some of the formula programs are very broad and are multimodal, and you can use them for a lot of different things. But they're formula, so that means you're probably going to get a set amount of money for those things versus discretionary, where you maybe have a really amazing project and you can go in there and try and win the money for that, right? So there's definitely trade-offs either way, but what we're hearing is that there's a strong desire to go more towards the formula side than the discretionary side. A couple of the newer programs in IIJA that did not exist before: the carbon reduction program, the reconnecting communities program. Some of your jurisdictions, even represented in the room today, have applied for funding through reconnecting communities, and also Safe Streets for All. Those are some of the new discretionary programs that were created under IIJA. It's unclear whether they will remain in the new legislation, but what we're hearing is that everyone's in agreement overall there needs to be more money for transportation. It's just, how does that money get distributed? That's the main thing. In addition to those performance measure requirements, we also have specific planning factors that as a region we have to demonstrate how we are supporting those federal planning factors or their federal planning focus areas. And you can see this up on the screen: economic vitality, safety, security, accessibility, environmental areas, promoting conservation, energy conservation, and improving quality of life. Thankfully, one of our major goals and for our region is to support the improvement of quality of life in the region. So you can see that a lot of the things we were already doing fold in, and maybe we have to write it up a different way in the documentation, but a lot of things we do and are important to us are showing up in these areas. Continuing on the list there, integration and connectivity for people and freight, efficient management and operations, and of course, preservation. So one of the things in more recent years that we've begun talking more about here in Campo and in North Carolina is, for many decades, as far as transportation goes, we've been a growing state. So we are growing our transportation network. Every year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, more road miles, more transit routes, that sort of thing. In other states, maybe more mature states, their transportation system is older and they're doing far less growth of the system and far more preservation and maintenance of their system. The Campo Executive Board, I think back in 2012, by policy set in our MTP that our freeways, we weren't going to have a freeway over 8 lanes, so 4 lanes in each direction, with the exception of where you have on and off ramps or what are called auxiliary lanes. And that was directly related to a couple of things, right? Number one, that was not too long after you're hearing about new highway widenings that were opening in Atlanta and some in Texas. There's one in Texas where I think it's 14 or 16 lanes on each side of the highway. So you do the math, that's a really, really wide highway. Now, if you are not driving on that interstate, that becomes an extremely insurmountable barrier within your community, right? And so our board has said, in order to go beyond that, they want to weigh in on it, right? So it's sort of a case-by-case basis, but as a general rule, we're sticking to no more than 8 lanes on those freeways. And again, you can go look at a map and you can probably find some areas where, there's 5 lanes on that side of the road. That might have been an area where we said, okay, it makes sense in that particular case, but it really was a policy, I think, to say, look, we are not looking to, totally widen our way out of congestion because we recognize that's not how we're going to do it. And having a diversified transportation network is far more important to addressing congestion. Any questions about any of that, about federal regulations or requirements? All right, we'll keep moving on. Now maybe everyone's favorite time, our first break.
Fun things to transition us. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what the MPO does, get into a little bit more detail on some of those functions and products that Chris mentioned earlier this morning. So the Metropolitan Transportation Plan for Campo, again, that's our long-range transportation plan. It goes out to 2055. We did just adopt that this past Wednesday. Our board did the final adoption. We're going to mention that 100 times today because that's a very exciting thing, especially here on the Campo staff. We have a lot of staff that work very hard to produce that long-range plan and working hard with our member jurisdictions and their staff to get that done. So reaching the point of adoption is very exciting for us. It happens every 4 years. We should probably bring the staff donuts or something to celebrate. So our Metropolitan Transportation Plan in Campo covers both our comprehensive transportation plan element and our Metropolitan Transportation Plan element. We'll get into the difference in those two things in just a few minutes. But the MTP is required to cover 20 years of time at least. And it's required to be fiscally constrained, meaning we have to prove that we're going to have enough money to build the things and conduct the programs that are included in the MTP in the time that we're saying we're going to do it. So we do that through revenue projections and looking at our different revenue sources that come into the MPO and into the region and into the state and how those might be allocated to things within our MPO region. The comprehensive transportation plan is the unfunded element. So the things that we know we need in this region, but we don't necessarily think we can afford by 2055. So that's the element of our plan that's sort of a wish list or a list of priorities that would come into play if we do get additional funding. So theoretically, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan is divided up into 3 horizon years. So we have 10-year buckets of projects that we're trying to do in the plan. Once that first 10 years of projects happens, that makes room in the next MTP update for the next 10 years of projects. Those would come from the comprehensive transportation plan element. As you may be aware, sometimes transportation projects take a really long time and funding landscapes shift and things get pushed back. So it's not always that we're able to produce all the things that we're planning to do in that 10-year plan. And so that kind of clogs up that pipeline, so to speak. So in order to get those projects done, we need to put them on a capital plan, which is our Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. That's actually the list of the next 10 years of time and what we intend to build and pay for. That's the document that Chris mentioned must be consistent with the state's Transportation Improvement Program, or the STIP. So the STIP and the TIP have to match exactly. They have to match in terms of budget. They have to match in terms of scope of project, extent of project. They have to match exactly so that the federal government knows that the state has coordinated with the local governments through the MPO on what is going to be built using those state and federal funds. The TIP also has to be consistent with our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So if something is not on the MTP, it cannot be in the TIP. There are some exceptions for that, things like sidewalk projects. We don't show every single sidewalk in the Campo region, one for one in our MTP. We just say programmatically, we're going to spend money on building sidewalks in this region. So those things kind of get a pass. Operational improvements, if you're making an intersection improvement. Again, if you look at the Campo region, we have a lot of intersections in the Campo region, so we don't have those individually listed out. We programmatically say we're going to make intersection improvements and increase our efficiencies and operations that way. On a year-to-year basis, we have what we call our Unified Planning Work Program. That's our UPWP for short. That's our annual program of planning work and our budget for the MPO. So you kind of think of it as the CTP is going way out in time. We know that these things are the things that we're going to need over the next 40 years. Our MTP, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, is the things we know we can afford, or we think we can afford over the next 20 to 25 years. Our TIP are the things we're actually setting aside funding for and paying to construct in the next 5 to 10 years. Our UPWP is a year-to-year planning work that we do at the MPO to get us towards these things. So again, that comprehensive transportation plan does include all modes of transportation. It includes our highway mode, our public transportation and rail, and our bicycle and pedestrian planning work. A lot of that bicycle and pedestrian planning work, and a lot of all of the work comes from the work that you all do as our partners locally, and what you're putting into your local plans. We take great care to feed that up into our regional plan to make sure that we're all on the same page priority-wise as well. Again, that CTP, the projects that are listed as being part of the CTP in our plan are unfunded. We don't think we have the funding to build those things just yet. So we expect that those things are going to happen beyond our 2055 horizon year. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan, again, fiscally constrained. We have to prove to the federal government through our financial projections that we think we're going to have enough money to pay for the things that we have put in this plan. We have a funding landscape in this region that includes a Wake Transit sales tax. So we know in the next 10 years, we have a Wake Transit plan. We're going to be able to deliver it because we have this funding source that has been created. We know what the state funding looks like because of the TIP for our first 10-year horizon plan. So between now and 2035, we are fairly confident on the projects that we're going to be able to deliver. Those things are in the TIP. They have funding assigned to them. Beyond that, we have to make some assumptions on what those funding sources are going to look like. Are the trends with Wake Transit going to, continue to trend upward, and then we can build additional transit services? We think that's a reasonable assumption. Are there new transportation taxes that may be passed in the region in 10 or 20 years in the future? We think that's also a reasonable assumption. Particularly given what's just happened in the Charlotte region. They did just vote to tax themselves additionally for transportation improvements in that region. So there's been some talk of potentially going in that direction in this region. So some of the assumptions that we have in later years in our Metropolitan Transportation Plan may not be things that are in reality right now, but we have to balance those realistic expectations with funding sources, with the desire and the knowledge of the transportation projects that we're going to need to support the travel demands that we're going to have in this region in the future. This plan is jointly developed with the Triangle West Transportation Planning Organization. So between us and Durham, we do have a singular kind of umbrella of plan. They do have their list of projects and we have our list of projects, so we don't have to amend our plan every time they want to make a change to something on that side, and vice versa. they don't have to amend their plan every time we make a change on our side. So we do still have that kind of firewall there, but we do joint planning work, joint travel demand modeling, joint fiscal projections, and ultimately adopt this umbrella plan. So this is a lot of what I've just been talking about. This is a federal requirement. It's one of the main reasons the MPO exists, is to make sure we're coordinating federal transportation dollars in a consistent way across the region that everyone has kind of bought into, along with the state. It also integrates land use and air quality strategies and goals. So Chris talked some about our air quality conformity process that's required in the region due to air quality standards. In the latest federal transportation authorization, or the IIJA, there were some land use requirements in there. In some states, MPOs actually have land use authority. North Carolina is not one of those states, so we do not have land use authority here. We just have the ability to shake our fist and say, really, you guys, we should do this, and help facilitate some of that conversation as we're thinking about the integration of land use and transportation. And we do that through a lot of the planning work that kind of builds up into our metropolitan transportation plan. We also have extensive public engagement that happens with our metropolitan transportation plan, and really with all of our transportation planning work that we do at the MPO. We try not to just have a public engagement session for the sake of having it and then kind of put that stuff in a file and move on to the next one to check the next box on our planning work. We do really try to be integrated with what we're hearing from plan to plan, and from our study work that we do, and working with you all to see what you're hearing from your local publics as well during your planning exercises, so that we can kind of consistently address all those concerns and recognize what are shaping our regional priorities. So the elements of our metropolitan transportation plan, it's, you know, at the end of the day, it's a planning document like any other planning document. It's just really big and a lot of work. So we do have our goals, objectives, and performance measures. Again, those are developed jointly with the Triangle West TPO. So those do represent the goals and objectives across the entire Triangle area. We have a regional travel demand model. We'll get into a little bit of information about that a little bit later. And we do have additional trainings on how our model works for anybody who's super interested in that. I don't think we provided enough coffee to go into a great level of detail on that today. We do population and job forecasts. So we look at where people are living now, where we're forecasting where people are going to live. Same with jobs. What jobs do we have on the ground now that people are trying to get to? How are they getting to those jobs? How do they want to get to those jobs? What are those travel patterns, and where are those kind of hotspot points around the region where people are coming and going to, and how can we facilitate that through transportation investment? Again, with the financial plan and assumptions, we do have to make a number of assumptions for 20 to 30 years in the future on how things will be funded in the region, and how we're going to invest in those different priorities in the region. We do that through the development of alternatives and different scenarios. We have a number of different scenario contexts that we look at, as far as land use assumptions across the region, as far as transportation investments that we might make. And we go through those pretty exhaustively with our local members and with our board to the point of exhaustion. And finally, we decide on one that will be our settled on final scenario that we're going to do our planning work on. We also have to do a Title VI analysis, which is another federally required thing to make sure that we are not impacting adversely different communities in different ways through our transportation investments. And then we look at our joint projects and programs across the region and across the two MPOs to see where there's some synergy that can be had and some efficiencies that can be had on joint projects and joint programs that we can put out throughout the region. The process to get to this involves, again, a lot of public engagement. So we do, we have open comment periods all the time on different things for the MPO, but we do have 4 specific areas of the MTP where we go out for public engagement, and we'll do things like go to your local festivals or have online surveys that are put out. Really try to get out into the community. We try to partner with our local agencies on different events that you all are conducting, or different engagement efforts that you're putting forth, so that we can, maybe add a question to a survey you're already doing, or have staff available at an event you're putting on, so that we can hear from your folks to help inform our planning work. So we do that at the vision and goals stage. Again, the MTP is kind of an iterative cycle. So every 4 years we do a new one. But we don't start with a clean slate and pretend we've never done any transportation planning in the region. We always build upon our adopted plan. So when we're building our 2060 MTP, which we'll be talking about for the next 4 years, we will be building upon this 2055 MTP that was just adopted. So part of that is reconfirming at the start of it our vision and goals. Here's the vision and goals that we founded our plan upon last time. Are those things still the things that we're gearing towards in this region? And we do find that those things shift in priority or importance over time. When we're doing our analysis and evaluation of those alternatives and of those scenarios that I talked about, we like to go out and talk to the community about those, the kind of if-thens. If we build this way, we will have to invest in transportation in this manner. And if we invest in transportation in this manner, then this other thing on the land use side might happen. So again, that kind of iterative process, we go out and try to talk with the community about those impacts and about what that means for development in the region. When we get to our preferred option or our preferred scenario, we go back out to the public and say, okay, we heard you on what's important in these different scenarios. We heard you on what your priorities are for investments. Here's what we've developed as our preferred scenario that we're going to build our MTP on. And we go out and we share that with the community for public comment and engagement. And then when we get to the final plan, we will share that out. And that's really more of a, here's what we've done, here's what we've come up with, and here's our plan for the next 4 years. We'll be back in touch with you real soon when we start talking about 2060. So we have a lot of planning efforts. Again, in our Unified Planning Work Program, we get into what we call our Special Studies Program. So that's a lot of planning work that we do here at the MPO to build that MTP from. So it's not that every 4 years we're coming up with a brand new set of transportation projects. We're working in those intervening 4 years with our local communities and on specific corridors and specific areas on planning work to really help inform when we get to that MTP, help inform what that's going to look like. So we do large area studies. Back in probably 2009 or 10, we started with our first large area study, our Southwest area study, which covered the kind of Fuquay, Harnett County, Holly Springs, Apex area of the MPO region. And we have since that time done those area plans around the edges of our region. We have a Northeast area study, a Southeast area study. We're currently working on a North Falls Lake area study. Kenneth Withrow here in the back is our project manager for that. That one should be wrapping up this June. So that really gives us an opportunity to dig into those area plans in a deeper way, get some deeper public engagement, get some deeper analysis, some more specific and concentrated analysis and recommendations for corridors in those areas that we don't necessarily have time to get to when we're working at the scale of the MTP. And then those things will feed up into the next MTP process. We also do corridor studies outside of those large area studies. Those could be, we've done them on NC 98, NC 50, all manner of corridor studies, and US 70. So those are normally things that are either suggested to us by our local members. Hey, we have some development going on this corridor. We have some changing condition going on this corridor. We'd like some help in planning what that's going to look like, to things that we internally as staff notice that we might need to take an extra look at in order to figure out what solutions we're going to put into our metropolitan transportation plan. We do what we call our hotspot studies, which are really small kind of technical feasibility studies. Again, those are things that we don't, when we're doing the MTP, we might not have time to dig into the operations of an individual intersection, but we know something needs to be done at that individual intersection. So we'll come in and work with the local jurisdiction on really spending some time doing some engineering assessment and figuring out those questions. We have a variety of multimodal studies. You may have heard of the Triangle Bikeway. We did a feasibility study for the Triangle Bikeway that has then advanced into a special design project that we're doing on behalf of Wake County and RTP right now. So that's actually moving that one forward towards project development. But other, multimodal studies, bicycle studies, transit studies, things like that we'll conduct across the region. And then there are local land use and transportation plans that are always going on. You can imagine with the number of jurisdictions that are involved in Campo, there's always somebody doing a comprehensive transportation plan for their city or their county. We devote staff to those upon request. We don't force ourselves on anyone, but when we're requested to provide technical assistance, we will assign a staff person to serve on a steering committee or focus groups or whatever it is that you all need from us in order to make sure that local and regional tie is still there. And then we also have our Wake Transit plan and other transit planning work, and we'll get into a little bit more Wake Transit stuff later in the session today. Just as an example, Apex is currently working on their comprehensive transportation plan. So we will have staff that's monitoring the progress of that. Again, we may have staff serving on a steering committee for that plan or participating in focus groups for that plan. However, they're locally developing that plan and want to engage with us. We're open to that. And then we take the information that they develop in their local plan and fit it into our regional planning work. So if they have a recommendation for a roadway, for instance, that is inconsistent with something that we have in the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, we hope to catch that early on in their planning work so that we can rectify what that might mean. And ultimately, if the decision is made that needs to change for whatever reason in the town of Apex, and we need to amend our MTP, we have a process for going through and doing that. We amend the MTP every couple of years, particularly when we get a new state transportation improvement program that we need to kind of rectify projects and where they sit in the time frame. But we also have opportunity for other smaller amendments to be included with that where we need to. But really trying to consistently plan for the transportation network that is reflective of your local priorities as well as the needs of the region. That's really what we spend a lot of time doing with these local plans. We also do, I mentioned we do multimodal, other kind of planning efforts across the region. Another example of that is a strategic rail infrastructure investment study. Daniel Spruill over in the corner of the room managed this one for us. This was really, you may have heard over the last 20 years that the Triangle was kind of coalescing around this commuter rail project, and we were kind of all in on this commuter rail project. And then it turned out that that's not really a feasible project for this region for funding reasons and for development reasons. And so there was a desire by our board to really reframe how we're thinking about rail in this region and rail transportation. And so we got a committee of the Campo board and the Triangle West MPO's board. We got a committee together of those two boards to really talk about what the future of rail might look like in this region if we approach it differently. They decided to what would it look like if we kind of jump on the bandwagon of all the work NCDOT is doing to enhance intercity passenger rail? What does that look like? Are we able to build off of that and leverage that through local funding to kind of maybe add some infill stations or some additional spur lines off of that we might be able to serve with passenger rail? So the study was really to look at what those opportunities might look like and to suggest to us some additional planning work to really operationalize some of that and what that might look like. So this map on the screen here is kind of that vision that they came up with. Ultimately, this is where we would like to ride on trains around the Triangle region. How can we get to that? We continue to work with NCDOT to further some of those goals and help support them in their grant applications and things like that to move some of that work forward. So I mentioned our Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. That is our budget and our work plan for the year. So that's done on a fiscal year to fiscal year basis. We also just adopted our fiscal year 2027 Unified Planning Work Program. We adopted that earlier this week as well. That's what drives the work that we do year to year. We have in there the spectrum of work that we do day to day at the MPO, as well as the special study work that I mentioned, our planning work that's suggested either by you all or by our internal staff on planning efforts that we see that are needed in the coming year in order to inform processes and the MTP as we move forward. We have what we call our core mission work tasks. Those are things that are really directly related to the MTP. If we need to answer a question on any transportation question that is directly plugging into that part of the MTP, that's what we consider our core mission work tasks. We also have our non-core mission work tasks, which is mainly things that are suggested through our local members. Those usually require some kind of additional local match from our members in order for us to do that work. Typically because those will have elements of work to them that are not necessarily direct MPO responsibilities that we're kind of helping out on. So we do require additional local match to cover some of those elements of the scope of work if it's outside of a strictly transportation study. For our fiscal year 2027, which starts July 1 this summer, these are the new studies that are proposed for this year. Again, some of these came from partner agencies. The Central Pines Regional Council, for instance, is going to update the region's travel demand management plan for the region. So we will be contributing to that. They'll be managing that study and we'll be contributing to that financially and staff resource wise. We got a request from Knightdale to do a safety kind of study down on an intersection area just south of Knightdale. So we'll be devoting some resource to that. The town of Franklinton came to us and wants some assistance with really defining what a southern bypass alignment might look like for the town. We've had a southern bypass of Franklinton on the MTP for quite a few years now, and it keeps getting impeded by all the rapid development that's happening in that area. So they would like our help in really setting an alignment for that so that they can begin preserving corridor in a more progressive way. Another study that'll be happening in Knightdale is a Knightdale Boulevard corridor study. This is helping to prepare Knightdale Boulevard for eventual BRT or bus rapid transit expansion into Knightdale. The Raleigh BRT system that is just starting construction this week on the New Bern Avenue corridor in Raleigh is pointed at Knightdale. Eventually, it's anticipated that it will extend out to Knightdale via Knightdale Boulevard. So the town is really interested in what they can do land use wise and regulation wise to really begin to prepare that corridor to receive that transportation investment whenever it does get funded to happen. We're also looking at doing an I-40 vision study. There are approximately 1 million studies that cover I-40 and have elements of I-40 in them. I will not list all million of them for you today, but they're all on our website. But there's a lot of looks that have been taken at I-40, and there are a lot of recommendations about and around I-40 that some of those may be conflicting, some of those may be supportive of one another, but really figuring out what our vision for I-40 is as a region and how we can implement that ultimate vision, resolving some of those conflict points, some of those areas where we think there are conflicting recommendations, some areas where the recommendations might not be valid anymore because of assumptions that were made that have not become reality, things like that. So that'll be a study that we're doing in partnership with NCDOT. This was actually suggested to us by NCDOT and the Triangle West TPO. We also have a couple of Wake Transit planning efforts that will be happening. The Wake Transit Plan is done every 4 years. It's a 10-year plan on how we're going to spend that transit sales tax and other funding sources that come into the Wake Transit world through fees and taxes. And the MPO is charged with maintaining that Wake Transit Plan. So the 10-year plan for Wake Transit funds is done at the MPO level through partnership with all of Wake County and our transit agency partners. Part of that is how we're going to actually spend the bus element of that plan money. What are the actual bus projects that are going to happen through that funding source? That's what's starting up right now. We adopt the Wake Transit Plan and say, okay, we're going to have so much money dedicated to bus service. Then we do a bus plan to tell us how we're going to spend that bus service money. We also have some major investment studies, again, to look at the extension of the bus rapid transit projects. The city of Raleigh manages the bus rapid transit projects that are in the Wake Transit Plan. There are 4 in there currently, with the anticipation of several more across the region. So we'll be starting on some major investment studies to look at early planning work and alignments on some of those future bus rapid transit projects. We also have a couple of technical kind of internal projects that we are looking at doing at the MPO. One of those is a project database. We have a lot of projects. We have projects that are on the TIP. We have projects that are in the MTP and may not be funded. We have projects in the CTP that may never be funded, may be funded at some point. We have idea projects that come out of these planning studies that we do. We don't have a really good way internally of organizing all of that data right now. It's kind of piecemeal done across several different systems. It's really too boring to talk about, but we are hoping to invest some resource in figuring that out so that we can more efficiently talk about and deliver some of those planning projects as well. We're also looking at a potential website upgrade. Our website has a whole lot of information on it. Hopefully you all use and utilize our website. We have our meeting agendas for all the meetings that we have. We have all of our planning studies on there. We have program level information, and we work really hard to keep our website useful and up to date. So there's a whole lot of information on there, but it is a rather old website. We haven't updated it thematically or organizationally in over 10 years. So we're gonna look at how we might approach that this coming year. We have some things that are going on right now that we're going to continue working on in the next fiscal year. One of those is that Triangle Bikeway, NEPA, and design work that I mentioned earlier. We also have an Eastern Wake ITS study, or Intelligent Transportation System study. This is really a signal system coordination study for the eastern part of Wake County. We did one for the western part of Wake County a couple of years ago, and we're able to find some streamlining of provisions of signal systems between Morrisville, Fuquay-Varina, Apex, that area of western Wake County. We're going to do that same kind of work on the eastern side of Wake County and see if we can find some of those same efficiencies on that side of the county. We also are currently working on a project for Apex, looking at Pleasant Park, which is a new park that has been developed there in town. There's only one road in and out of it, so they want us to explore some different options for some other multimodal access to that park. It's turned out to be a pretty major regional destination on that side of the county. So we are helping them through that. That's one of those non-core mission work study projects that we're doing with participation financially from the town of Apex. And we recently got a grant from NCDOT to conduct a regional advanced air mobility study. So that's looking at drone technologies and air mobility options. And that'll really be a regional kind of policy guiding document that will be starting up here in short order this year. Again, the ongoing work of the MPO is also covered in our Unified Planning Work Program, our LAP program, which is our locally administered projects program. That's we're going to go into more detail in that later in this session today. That's really where we spend a lot of our time and resource to help you build the things that we need to build in this region using local funds as a match to federal funds. And that's a competitive process that we use to allocate that funding out to our local members. Here we are starting on our 2060 MTP. So we've just adopted our 2055. We're going to start working on our 2060 MTP. Some of you who are TCC members have already been engaged in that process through our employment analyst work that's been going on as well to go ahead and begin working on our employment projections for the 2060 MTP. Our triangle regional model, again, we'll go into a little bit more detail on that, but the work to keep that maintained, we work with ITRI at NC State University, which is the Institute for Transportation Research and Education. ITRI at NC State manages our travel demand model with us and NCDOT and Triangle West TPO. I'm going to go into a little bit more on our blueprint for safety implementation work, but we recently did adopt a regional safety plan called the Blueprint for Safety. So we have a lot of ongoing work to implement the recommendations in that plan. Our general public engagement, again, I mentioned we have a lot of public engagement that goes on related to our MTP, but we also just have a lot of general programmatic public engagement that happens. Bonnie Parker on our staff here at the table running the show is our public engagement planner and really keeps our ducks in a row as far as delivering our engagement and making sure that we're working with everyone to maintain this level of knowledge, a base level of knowledge about the MPO and what we do and what our resources are for you all, as well as helping the public understand transportation planning processes and projects. We have our mobility management program. Sarah Keach on our staff is going to talk to you a little bit more in detail about that a little bit later. That's a new program that we have gotten funding for in the past 2 years. Again, I'm not going to steal that thunder. Wake Transit Plan, Ben Howell on our staff is our Wake Transit Plan program manager. We also have 3 other staff that work full-time on Wake Transit Plan issues. We provide technical assistance. Again, if any of you all have planning work going on and you need some kind of resource, if you need technical assistance with understanding model results or data or mapping or planning assistance or any of that kind of thing that we can offer here at the MPO, we have staff ready and waiting to meet those technical assistance requirements or requests, I should say. We have a Safe Routes to School program. Again, Kenneth Withrow on our staff manages that. We have a group that gets together periodically every month, every other month, maybe quarterly, to talk about Safe Routes to School issues, conduct safety audits at different schools around the region, and really move forward the idea of safely being able to walk and bike to school in our region. We have transportation demand management. Again, that's primarily managed through the Council of Governments for our region, but we do have staff dedicated to assisting with that process and with that data and analysis that goes into the transportation demand management program. Chris touched on our congestion management process. Evan Koff on our staff is dedicated to our congestion management process. During our federal review several years ago, it was noted that we needed to enhance our efforts in the congestion management process area. That's why we created a staff position that is dedicated towards that work. And so Evan does a lot of work to update that process and our status of the system report. And we've really tried to hone in on that recommendation that we got during our federal review that we needed to enhance our efforts that way. And then finally, our strategic plan implementation happens just through all of the work that we do and through conversations with our executive board and with our TCC and with member conversations. We go out and meet with our members one-on-one from time to time and really just try to make sure we're maintaining an active read on the pulse of the region and make sure that we're being responsive to local priorities as well as what we've adopted as part of our strategic plan for the MPO. You get all this for the low price of 92 cents per capita. We try to efficiently use our staff resource that we have. Our funding is federal funding. It does require a local match. That local match is paid for by our members through a per capita share amount. Whenever we adopt our UPWP, that's when we kind of set our local match amount. And so then we'll send out letters to you all so that you know what your local match is going to be for the coming year. That's why we adopt our work plan so early so that we can get that information to you all as you enter your budget seasons and can have a good idea of at least what your commitments for the MPO are. So I mentioned our blueprint for safety. This is a huge effort that we're undertaking now. There in the new IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure bill, there was a big safety component. There's a whole program in there called Safe Streets for All that did put forward funding for planning work and funding for implementation work. You could only get the implementation money if you had a plan upon which to draw from. So instead of going through the federal process and waiting around for federal money to come through to get a grant to do a safety plan, we went ahead and used our own MPO resources to do a plan for the region so it would enable our local members to go ahead and go after that implementation funding and have a plan to rely on as backup. We have had several communities that have done their own safety plans. Morrisville, Knightdale, Raleigh, Apex have done their own safety plans or their own Vision Zero plans. But for those members who have not been able to do that, we have this regional plan that you can use as backup justification for applying for that funding for implementation of safety projects. So this is kind of a high level plan. It's policy related, but there's also project related information in there. It's really meant to inform other regional efforts that we're doing, identify areas where we think safety could be better incorporated into projects or policies or programs that we have. We also are ensuring consistency with some of the state safety plan work and the state safety plan money that's available for implementation. And it does follow the kind of universally agreed upon safe systems approach. We're doing this work through 2 task forces. So we have staff here at Campo, Evan Koff and Caleb Allred, that are managing our 2 task forces. One of those task forces is our Safety Policy and Culture Task Force. That's the one that's really looking at those policy elements and the behavioral elements and the educational elements that are important to creating the safety culture across the region. The Safety Projects Task Force is looking more at prioritization efforts, how we're looking at safety data, how that data is informing planning and prioritization work, and ultimately project delivery, both from a regional perspective as well as assisting you all with looking at those things more closely on a local level. We envision those groups meeting about quarterly. Again, their first meetings happened earlier this month. We had a big safety summit in December to kick off this work. I think both of those first meetings were very successful. We had a lot of good participation, and even though they were virtual, we had a lot of good conversation, which is a little unusual for a virtual meeting setting. You know, you often get people who maybe aren't paying attention or don't feel comfortable asking a question, especially if there's 40 or 50 people on the line. But in these meetings, there was a lot of good conversation. So I think that really points to a hunger out there for making improvements to safety in our transportation systems across the region. So their email addresses are here. Again, we're going to email this presentation to you at the end of this, but this information is also available on our website. If you're not involved in those task forces, I encourage you to get involved in those task forces, at least to listen along with what's going on, or dip in on the website for resources. And these task forces are not just our executive board members and our TCC members, but they're also members from across the public safety community, the advocacy community, general public, the users. We have some consultants across the region that have joined these task forces. So a lot of broad interest in the work that we're doing here. So we're proud of the work that we're doing to implement these recommendations out of our safety plan. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex for a few minutes on the travel demand model, and then move us into some more spot and lap issues. If anybody has any questions for me before I sit down, I'm happy to answer them real quick. Yeah.
We got the 2055, the 2060, we'll have the 2065, but we say we do it every 4 years,
Yes.
right? Why don't we say we do it every 5 years?
We can't do that kind of math to make it every 4 years. It's easier.
One of these updates will keep the number the same, the out year the same, but we need to update it every 4 years. That's the requirement for us, but the 5-year rhythm for the general public seems to be, kind of how we've done it.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay.
All right. Just a show of hands. How many folks have comprehensive plans going on right now? Anyone? Garner? What town?
Apex.
Apex.
We just finished.
Johnston County just finished one. Morrisville just finished one. I think Wake County's got one underway soon, I think. There's a good chance every single one of those plans is probably using this travel demand model at some point to inform those recommendations, right? So the travel demand model is a requirement MPOs have. A lot of times the MPO maintains that travel model in-house. In North Carolina, a lot of times NCDOT maintains the travel demand model. Campo is a little bit unique. We actually have a model partnership. So our model is co-owned by both Campo and Triangle West MPO, and DOT has been a partner as well. So one of the nice things about that is pooling resources. We can actually kind of leverage our funding, and we can afford maybe a more sophisticated model than we could if we went at it alone. The other thing there is that model now spans a much larger area, which means we get consistent forecasts throughout the triangle. And Campo's not saying, here's how much travel is going to be on I-40, and Triangle West has a completely different number. That could be possible in other parts, but again, we have a joint model, so that helps us out. Before I get too far into, on our website, we have two documents I want to reference. There's a summary guide, a one-pager, and then there's a planner's guide. These are great resources. If you go to our website and go to maps and data, then there's a TRM section there, but they will, help explain some of the things the model is good for and things it's not appropriate for. It's important to remember this is not a crystal ball. It is a tool for forecasting purposes. Some of the questions we can answer, think regional questions. What happens if I put high frequency transit near my key job centers? How many more vehicle trips is that going to take off the road? What happens if I change my land use? What if I go from low density to a higher density? What types of impacts is that going to make on travel, on congestion, on air quality, all sorts of questions. This is a best practice model, meaning it has some of the more advanced features or functionality that you would expect. One of those involves greater details of the characteristics or demographics of the region. So obviously folks under 16 aren't creating a lot of vehicle trips, but folks that are a little bit older, we don't all travel the same way. So our household size, our age, our income levels, where we live, all impacts how we travel. And our model does a much better job than previous versions of trying to capture those differences in trip options. We actually do have a whole separate modeling not webinar, but lunch and learn session we get into for folks that are really interested. But I want to point out that these resources are available to staff. Again, your consultants are using them. We also have a community viz or land use model that we use. And I mentioned before that the model outputs are only as good as the data we feed in. You've probably heard garbage in, garbage out. We do ask our membership occasionally to help us out with 3 key data inputs: your land use. So your staff, for our elected officials, your staff get emails from us. Please update the land use that feeds into this model. Please review and update the key employers for your jurisdiction that feeds into this model. Please update the road networks if folks have built new roads. All of these 3 sort of data inputs are very key to the success and the accuracy of the forecast that we get. So unless we have folks that are really interested in travel demand modeling, I'll move on. All right. So if you don't have questions about travel demand modeling, I'm going to move into a fun topic, at least for me, which is prioritization, the tip and the step, and money, how we're going to get projects funded. So to start off with, when we have our 10-year step, in case you're wondering, I should have asked the question before, how much percentage of our overall funding goes to roadway? It's about 68%. This number changes a little bit over time, but this just gives you a breakdown of the entire state transportation improvement program. How 68% going to roadway, 10% going to public transit. You got a little over 12% at bike ped, just a little over 1.5% going to aviation. Ferry, obviously pretty low there on ferry, and rail just hovering around 7%. So that's the money breakdown where all of our state and federal transportation funds are going in North Carolina. Where does that go geographically? Who's getting all the money? The beach, the mountains, Charlotte? Any thoughts? We got coffee, folks. Where's the money going? All right, well, here's one way we look at it. This is a map we make, and we call it the goalpost map. All right? Pardon? Yeah, anybody know why we call it the goalpost map? That's right. It looks like if you're looking at the side of a football field, you got one goalpost on one end, one goalpost on the other end. So this is our money return map. This is how much money we estimate that each county contributes to transportation over how much money they're getting back in transportation projects and maintenance. So you get to some of the more rural parts of the state, and you can see Well, one, they don't have a lot of population. And two, if I get over into Hyde County and I build some of those bridges out there, it only takes one or two bridges. That's a lot of money. Or if I'm over in the mountains and I'm moving rock and blasting to build a highway through a mountain, there's a lot of money for not a lot of population. But if you look at our area, you can see Johnston County, Harnett County, Franklin County, you're in that 75 to 100% return rate, not too bad. Wake County, a little bit lower, you're in that 50 to 75%. So that's how much money we estimate you're getting back for what you're putting in. Just interesting way to look at the funding. So Chris mentioned this, the tip. Again, Campo maintains the tip, DOT maintains the STIP. The two have to match in order for a project to move forward. And that's one of the ways that our elected officials have control over what happens in our region. It doesn't mean that we get everything we want, certainly not, but we can stop a project that we don't want to move forward for whatever reason. Now, you may have heard the term SPOT. You may have heard prioritization. We use them somewhat interchangeably here at Campo. SPOT, the Strategic Prioritization of Transportation, came about 2009-ish. And I'm a huge fan of SPOT. If you've been at Campo long, you've been to the meetings, you know I get excited about this topic. And the reason why is this is such an improvement over the old way of choosing which projects get funded, which way back in the day was MPOs and counties would submit a wish list of projects, and DOT officials and division engineers met with board members. And over the course of a couple months, a STIP eventually was produced, and you couldn't really tell, why did this project get funded? Why didn't my project get funded? Why is this project here? Why is that project there? It wasn't a very transparent process. So for all the faults we may have or issues we may have with the scoring of SPOT, at least it is transparent, and I can explain to you why your project moved forward or why it didn't move forward or what we can do to make it better. So I'm a huge fan of SPOT. Now, again, it started in 2009, and about the third bullet down, I want to point out I believe Governor McCrory was in office when the Strategic Transportation Investment Law came into play. Now, we've been scoring projects since 2009, but in 2013, 2014, that's when we changed how the money was going to be distributed across the state. Prior to 2013, we had something called the equity formula, which is kind of an old joke. There's nothing equitable about the equity formula. Or the East thought the money was going to the Piedmont. The Piedmont thought the money was going to the mountains. Nobody was really happy with that system. STI has a lot of advantages over that. I'll get into that. So since 2013, we've been operating in North Carolina under the Strategic Transportation Investment Law. Now, for Campo and for every MPO in North Carolina, I always start with the three things our elected officials have to know. Number one, when it comes to SPOT, you get to choose what projects compete for funding. So that's number one. Number two, you get to assign local input points to boost the score of those projects. And then finally, number three, the Campo Executive Board adopts the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. So you've got the final say in where projects land within that 10-year window. None of those are rubber stamps. Those are all specific actions, and they're very deliberate. Okay, so how does STI and SPOT work? Well, the first thing it does, it takes every project in North Carolina and it chops them up into these three tiers. And they are the statewide tier, the regional impact tier, and the division needs tier. Now, your statewide mobility, you see the funding percentage there. 40% of all of that money is going to that category, statewide mobility. 30% is going to this next category we call it regional impact. And finally, the remaining 30% goes down to division needs. Now, what's in each category? Okay, statewide mobility, that's all your interstates across all of North Carolina. That's your three major airports, Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte, Greensboro. It's all your Class A rail lines. All of that falls in statewide mobility. Now, you'll notice there's a bullet point under there that says 100% data. We don't put local input points on the statewide. It's 100% data driven. I'll go back to that's a really big advantage over the way we used to do it in the past with engineers and board members and politicians sort of figuring out who's going to get the money. 100% data driven when it comes to funding statewide mobility. Very transparent. I like it. Regional impact. That's all your US and your NC routes. So in Campo, right, that's your NC 54, your NC 55, your US 401. All of those routes fall in that regional category. That includes your regional transit. And then finally, we get down to the division needs. That's everything else. All your secondary roads. Jones Sausage Road, said somebody from Apex, 1010 Road, McCrimmon, you name it. Any of those secondary roads, Cedar Plank Road, all of those fall into division needs. That's also all your bike ped, every greenway, every sidewalk, and the vast majority of all your transit. It's a huge category in terms of projects, and it's 30% of the funding, okay? Now you notice these little arrows that go from one bucket to the next. So I put a project in for I-40 widening. It's an interstate. It goes into statewide mobility. It's 100% scored on data. Doesn't score high enough to get funded. So what happens? That little arrow says it gets to trickle down and come over and now compete for the funding in the regional pot. You with me? All right, so now we're scoring all the regional routes, the US routes, the NC routes, and all those interstates that didn't get funded over here in statewide. Now they're all competing for the regional money. We spend all that money. The next arrow, all of those projects that didn't get funded now get to come over and compete for that last pot of money in the division needs, which is where all my secondary roads and my bike ped is. Now tell me, what type of facility is this system geared towards? It ain't secondary roads, right? The system is set up to favor those higher order facilities, okay? Because they have an opportunity to get funded at all three levels. Whereas your bike ped, your transit, your secondary roads, you are stuck in that one small section of funding. So that's how the system is set up to work. Now let's talk about the regions. Statewide is statewide, obviously, right? I-40 is competing with I-77, with I-95, and so on and so on. These are the 14 NCDOT divisions. You'll notice that they're color coded. A paired division makes up a region. So my folks in Johnston County, they're in Division 4. You're paired up with Division 1, you're Region A. That's your region that you're competing with. My folks in Chatham County, you're in Division 8. You're paired up with Division 10. Sorry about that. And so you're now competing in Region E. Everybody else in Campo, you're in Division 5 and 6. Together, you form Region C. So I love this. So we got NC 42 in Fuquay-Varina. You're in Wake County. You're in Division 5. You're in Region C. NC 42, as soon as I cross I-40, you're in Johnston County. You're in Division 4. You're in Region A. Have you noticed that the end part of NC 42 that's funded is the part over in Region A? Why is that? Less competition. Yeah, NC 42 in Johnston County is a rock star of a project. It has a lot of traffic, a lot of congestion. And when you compare that part of NC 42 against everything else in Region A, you better believe it. It is a rock star. I'm not knocking Fuquay-Varina. I live in Fuquay-Varina. But when I take NC 42 from NC 50 back towards town, and I compare that with all the other NC and US routes in Region C, that is not as big a fish in that pond. You with me? So how competitive you are for funding is 100% related to who your competition is and how much money is available, okay? So my point in all this is SPOT is not a slot machine. It is not that you just put a project in, pull a lever, close your eyes and cross your fingers and hope that something gets funded. It is strategic. And that's how we try to think about it at Campo. All right, so the money, again, big blue bucket, 40% of your funding. 7 regional buckets. How do we divvy up that 30%? Well, this is good for Campo. Those buckets are divvied up by population. So my Region C bucket is much larger than my Region A bucket. At one point, we had about I'm looking at Daniel for numbers. We might have had $900 million in play in Region C and maybe only 200 or 300 million in play in Region A. Again, the population for Division 1 and 4 are much lower. So we got a much bigger bucket in Region C, but you got a lot more people and traffic and higher scoring projects in Region C. Now we get over to the division needs buckets. Those are not based on population. Those are equal percentages or allotments. So every division gets the same amount of money for their secondary roads, for their bike ped and their transit, regardless of how many people live in that division. Are you following me now, right? Okay, so I go to Division 1. I've got Edenton, I've got the Outer Banks, I've got Hertford, Elizabeth City. They're getting the same amount of money for their secondary roads and everything in Division 1 that Division 5 does with Raleigh, Cary, Durham, all of Wake County. You know what the population difference is between those? The amount of cars, the amount of traffic. It's massive difference, right? But that's the same amount of money, which means it is extremely difficult to get anything funded in the Division 5 bucket because the competition is so fierce. You've got to have an incredibly high scoring project. If I could take some of our projects and move them to other parts of the state, they'd be rock stars too. But that's why I started off with the 42 example, right? 42 in Johnston County, rock star. 42 in Wake County, not so much. Okay, sorry this is taking so long. Now, how do we choose what projects go into spot? Well, we don't throw darts at the map. We start off with every project in the MTP. That's always our starting point. We don't make up projects on a whim. We pull them from the adopted plan. Shelby said we spent 4 years working on that plan. We have a lot of trust and faith in it. So now I'm going to take every project that's already in the books, every project that's funded, every project that's under construction. We don't need to score them again. They're already in the system. Take those out. What's left? Every other project. Now I take everything that's already carried over in spots. Some of them are recompeting. We're in there last year and such. I don't have to compete with those or resubmit those. And what I'm left with is all the projects outside the current STIP. How do we pick those? Now, I'll tell you, some folks across the state take the number of projects they have and they divvy them up by their members geographically or by population. We're going to give Raleigh 3 projects. We're going to give Cary 2 projects. We're going to give Fuquay 1 project, or however they divvy them up. That is a great way to make your board happy. That is a terrible way to actually get something funded. Okay? What we do is we use our model, we use our data, and we find the most competitive projects we can for our region, right? And our travel demand model is a great substitute for how those projects are going to be scored once they get to spot. So again, we want to submit the best projects we can for funding. Now we get to that second part where you assign points. Again, we're trying to be very strategic here. The letters here kind of represent the transportation projects, and the goal is to get to the top of the mountain, to get funded and in the tip. We have some projects that will score so high based on their technical score that we don't need to keep padding their score with local input points. Likewise, and we have a lot in this category, I have the unfortunate conversation with a lot of mayors. I know you want that project, but it scores so low on the technical side, there is no way we can possibly get that project into the money. So should we waste local input points on a project that has zero chance of actually making it into the money? No. The alternative there is we try to take the projects that can benefit the most from the local input points in order to maximize the number of projects that are competitive for Campo. And here's what this looks like. On the left-hand side, I have a bar graph of all the transportation projects in competition. The blue ones are Campo, and this is just showing the technical score. Now you see this line in the graph, this red line, that's where we think the money's going to run out. We call that the red line. Not very creative. All right. So I got a project up here above in the high 60s. It's already above the red line. It's one of the highest scoring projects in this competition. I don't need to make that score a 70 plus. It's already made the cut, right? It's already in the money. Likewise, I got projects down here at the 10, and even if I gave them 100 points, it only raised them about 15 points. So I raise it from a 10 to a 25, big deal. I'm still nowhere close to the money. I've wasted those points. But if you look over here at the right, if I take those projects around the 30 mark and I give them 100 points, I'm pushing them above the red line. And now I overall have more projects for Campo that are in the competition for funding. Now that's the philosophy we use in assigning points, right? And is to maximize the number of projects that we have that are in a competitive position for funding. Have I lost anybody yet? Okay. I'll keep moving. So now, like Sunday in a golf tournament, you've now made the cut. You're above the red line, right? What else comes into play? Well, the first option there, spot ranking, that's your spot score. That's still important. But at this point in the game, a whole bunch of other factors come into play and have a more significant impact on where you go or land in the step. And the first one down here at the bottom left is project development timeline. And I'm going to come back to that one. Funding category. Again, statewide, regional, division, there's 22 funding buckets. You might have the highest score, but if that money that you compete, that bucket that you compete in is out of money, you can't really move forward, right? STI law provisions. In the law that I mentioned in 2013, there are caps on how much money can go to certain types of projects. There's also things like corridor caps. So there are rules into how we go about programming projects. It is not as simple as the highest score gets to go first. In addition to that, Chris showed you a slide with all these different funding amounts or funding types. It gets even bigger when you start talking about the tip. So here you have, say, transit funds. Obviously, I cannot spend transit funds on widening I-40. Those have to go to transit projects. So those funding restrictions come into play. All of this happens after we do all our final scoring, and DOT takes about 6 months to figure all this out and release a draft STIP. Now, here's the project development timeline I mentioned, right? Excuse me. So the first project, major freeway, something like NC 540, right? We put something like that in spot, scores a 94, rock star, highest in the state. But that's a massive project. We've got to have, if we started today, we need 2.5 years of planning work. We need another 2+ years of design work. We need another 2 years of right-of-way, which means even if the money aside, if I start today, it still takes me 9 years to get to construction. I'm looking at some of my DOT guys in project development because they know it doesn't take, you can't move as fast as you want sometimes, right? So even if that is the perfect project, it still can only come in year 9. Come down a few spots and you see project 79. That project, let's call that an intersection improvement. We don't need a lot of planning. We don't need new right-of-way. That can go to construction right away. So even though it scores lower, it gets to move faster simply because of the project development timeline, right? It's common sense once you start thinking about it, but all of this factors into how you develop this massive STIP. And we try to take all those things into consideration when we're putting together our portfolio of projects that we're going to submit. All right, so I'll move on. Here's the actual results for Region C from Spot 7. In this particular round of scoring, we had $992 million in play. So everybody in lavender in Division 5 and 6 in that map I showed you, you're competing for $992 million. You had a total of 321 roadway projects, or excuse me, a total of 321 projects, 158 were Campo, and we told the board, we think we have 25 that might be competitive, right? And you can see that bar graph over on the top right, all of those total up, what's my number there? $7.5 billion competing for $992 million. That's Region C. That's what NC 42 in Wake County was up against. And the little green bar at the bottom is how much money we have. Okay, this is what spot looks like. So 992 million in play, 7.5 billion competing for that 992 million. Now, the bottom left, the little pie chart is showing you what's making up that $7 billion. The red are actually the regional projects for a Division 5. The purple are the regional projects from Division 6. The blue and the green are those interstate projects that didn't get funded at the statewide level. They get to roll down and compete for the regional dollars, right? So just showing you how competitive it is in Region C. The bar graph on the right is a scatter plot of all the projects competing for this money. And of course, we show you where we think that 992 million is going to run out. Everybody above that has a shot at the money. Everybody below that red line, sorry, we'll try again in 2 years for the next round of spot. Okay. My point in this, you don't have to be an expert in spot. My point is there's a deliberate strategy in how we go about doing this in order to play the odds and be as competitive as we can. Now, just as an example, we get down to Division 6, right? Our folks in Angier and Northern Harnett County, $79 million in play over 10 years, 44 roadway projects, 11 are Campo, 5 we think are competitive. All of those projects totaling up to, help me out, 2.6 billion. So $2.6 billion worth of projects trying to compete for 79 million. So no, Mayor of Angier, there's probably not a very good chance we're going to get anything funded. There's not a good chance hardly anybody's going to get, right? It's just, that's how much money is in play. So we're trying to keep this very factual when we explain to the board why we're making the recommendations that we do. So that's my slides on spot and prioritization, but I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. It's a fun topic, I think. None? All right. We'll keep moving. We get to LAP, more money. You got a better shot here. Now this is our, where we can talk about Campo specifically. So the LAP program, Chris mentioned earlier that TMAs, those larger MPOs, have funding that directly comes to them from the federal government. And it comes in different funding types, STP-GDA, TAP or Transportation Alternatives, CMAQ, carbon reduction funding. All these different pools or types of funding come to Campo. We don't make you apply for an individual funding type. We put all that together in one pot of money. It's up to about $25 million and it grows over time. And so every year our members just submit a project to Campo and we score them, make a recommendation to the board, and you don't have to worry about what type of funding you're getting for your project. We take care of that. The purpose of LAP is to make sure that we secure those federal dollars and we get them out the door going to projects and use them, and we don't have them sitting around and be vulnerable to any sort of federal rescission, which actually happened in the past, and we lost about $50 million. You can imagine our elected officials were not very happy about that. Okay, and that is what initiated the creation of the LAP program. So now with this system, we are scoring and looking for low cost, ready to go projects. And our applicants submit a specific project for a specific amount of money in a specific year. And I cannot stress that last part enough, in a specific year. So Wednesday, Wednesday this week, our board approved the FY27 funding. Those funds need to be obligated in the federal transportation process by September 2027. There is no guarantee that those funds will be there beyond September 2027. So you elected officials that have LAP funding, you make sure that your staff, your project managers understand this money does not last forever. It is a specific award for a specific year. Okay? Now, how we go about with LAP, again, there's this $25 million pot, and we target that out to different modes of transportation. In the last couple of years, it's been 65% roadway, 25% bike ped, 8% transit. Our scores based on technical data that we come up with, but there's also local priority. So each member is assigning local input points. There is a factor as to where that project is identified in the MTP. So sooner in the MTP scores higher than projects in the third decade. There is a prior agency funding level, which is meant to be an equity component to LAP, so that if you have not received LAP funding for several years, your projects will get some extra points in that category. If you take down LAP dollars every single year, that scoring part is going to go down for your jurisdiction. It's essentially how much money has your town taken down in the last 5 years per capita. Okay. LAP projects for this year, we awarded about $33 million. You can see those projects on the map there. And then finally, let me get to my timeline. Every year you have a call for projects. Let me start with the spring. Our LAP committee works to review and discuss any changes to the LAP program. Do we need to change the scoring? Are we going to increase the overall funding? How do we want the modal mix to look at? Is it still 65% roadway and such? That committee makes recommendations and we present that to the TCC and the board in June. It's out for public comment over the summer, and then every August, the board approves the LAP program for the next year, any new changes, and opens the call for projects. By Halloween, the project window is closed. Staff and your staff in September and such work to go over the projects. We go over the applications, make sure we answer any questions so that your projects are as competitive as they can be come Halloween. Come October 31st, the window is shut. We take the month of November to score the projects. We take the month of December to work with that selection committee. January and February, which is where we are now, goes through the publishing and the adoption of those projects, and then it starts all over again. Every single year. Can I answer any questions about the LAP program? And yes, we have training for LAP that lasts about as long as MPO 101 every year. Bashad.
Not a question, but general question.
Sure.
Just I'm thinking now, because we have a lot more electrical vehicle on the roads, electrical cars.
Yes.
In the road. And of course, they are not buying the gas. So what are our long-term solution for that problem?
Okay.
Get more and more electric cars.
So I want to make sure I understand the question is, because of the nature of an urban area like the Triangle with more electric vehicles on our network who are using our roads but are not contributing to the revenue through gas tax, how do we account for that loss of revenue? What will we do in the future to recoup some of those costs? Am I right?
Right.
It's a great question. And I'm going to let Chris answer that one.
So, I mean, the quick, easy answer is today we don't have to worry about that, right? So the funding in our LAP program is federal funding. Currently, what underpins most of that is the gas tax, both federal and state gas tax. Although in our LAP program, it's almost exclusively the federal gas tax that funding is coming from, and electric vehicle fees that are being talked about. Nationally, they're talking about things like user pay. So maybe it's going to be a VMT-based system, something like that. The answer to your question is the federal funds will follow whatever they do for the federal funds, right? We don't have to make a decision locally or regionally about that. Maybe a little more nuanced answer is in our long-range plan or in our regional plan, we recognize that there is not enough what we call traditional funding, so state and federal funding, to do all the things that we've identified that need to be done in the next 30 years. So in our longer term financial plan, as Shelby had mentioned, we identify additional funding. Now, we identify three different ways, three realistic ways that we could get that funding, either a VMT fee, a sales tax, or property tax. Things that two of those three things could be decision points are controlled at the regional level. Two of those three things would require enabling legislation to occur. So if that were to occur, we have identified another revenue source that is not tied to the gas tax that could be used to fund local projects. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, nationally, it's a problem. It's gonna be getting worse and worse, I guess. But we need to find out some solution.
Currently, we aren't seeing revenue go down below other levels. We are seeing that the growth in the revenue is slowing down. It hasn't gotten to the point where in 2026 we saw less revenue than 2025, right? But the growth between 25 and 26 is slowing down. And eventually, if we don't do anything and the overall vehicle fleet in the country does flip over to electric and not with traditional gasoline, then you'd start to see that reduction. I think also the other thing keeping that up is just growth in population, growth in number of drivers, number of vehicles, that sort of thing. So it's definitely a long-term issue that's got to be solved, but it's not a short-term emergency that we're seeing yet.
Here's a tangential question to this question. What if instead of electric vehicles, there's a more massive shift towards public transit? So, the amount of electric vehicles and gas-powered vehicles overall is reduced. If that was a future scenario, what would funding look like?
Yeah, very, very interesting question. I think so the question for those online was, rather than a switch to just electric vehicles, what if between electric vehicles and increased use of public transportation, overall the amount of gas being purchased goes down. So the gas tax revenue goes down. That's essentially the question. Another great sort of philosophical question almost, right? And I think the way to answer that is we can look to areas where both here in the US and in other parts of the world where sort of some of that is starting to happen, right? And if you look at shifts to public transportation on a larger scale, you got to look at some of the major metropolitan areas to see what's happening. So places like New York City, right, where you're approaching 50% of commuters using public transportation rather than regular vehicles. What have they done there? They've gotten very creative and stolen the idea from London, and they have congestion pricing now in Manhattan, right? And what they've seen there is two things happened: a lot more revenue for public transportation and operations and maintenance of the transportation network there. So that solves that revenue issue you're talking about. But it's also reduced congestion, right? And improved travel time and travel time reliability in Manhattan. So that's probably one of the real world examples we can look to and say, here's how they're doing it. Now, will that work here? We don't know. We'll have to figure it out. One of the things I'm not born and raised in North Carolina or in the Triangle like many of you all. I'm a transplant. I've been here for over 20 years now. And I will say the one thing I've really liked the most about the Research Triangle region is while we invent and come up with a lot of really good ideas, we also don't have any qualms about borrowing, or stealing a bunch of ideas and turning it into a Frankenstein that works for our region, right? So I think that's what will likely happen in the future here.
So I was part of this kind of policy board for the Transportation Research Board. It's in publication, but essentially we were researching trying to figure out, knowing that gas taxes aren't generating revenue. It was looking for alternative methods to kind of provide a toolkit for agencies to see how they generate that. It's in publication. This research was completed probably about a half ago, but again, it's through the National Transportation Research Board. Once it gets published, I can certainly share. But there was another panelist on it from NCDOT. So it was kind of assessing that assessment, basically. So I can certainly share that.
It is very much an issue that is being looked at, and people are trying to come up with different ideas that could be implemented. I think ultimately decision makers, elected officials, will have to choose what they want to do.
No question.
Yeah, a question about for the LAP program. So from what I understood from your presentation is that it is basically pooling different federal sources and scoring it out. And in this most recent set of projects that was approved, I guess just this week, the Smith Creek Greenway was added to the list after the initial selection panel recommendation. So I was wondering Or is that a forward commitment of anticipated funds or some money that was shifted from another bucket? Like, how did that happen?
Sure. No, it's a great question. If your initial pool is 25 million, how do you justify programming 33? A couple reasons. So one, I mentioned all of those different funding types are apportionments from the federal government, and they are based on population. So we'll see over time every year, we're averaging about a 2% increase right now in those different funding types, right? And so I don't remember the last time we went, when did we go from 20 million to 25 million? It's been several years, and before 20 million, it was 16 million. Before 16 million, it was around 12 million in the early stages. So every so often, we come back and look at our forecasted revenue, or not forecasted, but what our apportionment is from the federal government. And we can see, all right, we're up to a point where we can now increase that pot from 25 to some other point. We have not received for FY26 the full information on all of those funding types, but we have seen some. So for example, we've gotten our CMAQ funding. And so when we look at that and we look at the trend, as well as how much, we're very confident we can cover, say, 29 million and change right now. Now, again, we would expect to see those funding types for the other funds to go up as well. That should push us into maybe early 30s or, low 30s or such. So next year would have been an anticipated ask of the board to increase from 25 to more. This is doing it just a little bit early. But again, we had extremely high scoring projects. And then you couple that with the fact that for the 25 million last year, we only programmed 11 million and change. So we had a good bit of gap from last year. Our funding is going up. The combination of the two, it kind of gave us the confidence that we could go ahead and increase that pot. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you.
Anything?
Alex, we also had one question here online. Is there a breakdown of where the 25 million LAP money actually comes from?
Yes, although, we can show that. I don't know that that's been of great importance in the past because, again, well, go ahead.
Every year, the federal government publishes the amount of money by funding source that's being allocated or sub-allocated out to each region. Generally, everyone has been sort of the mindset, if we don't have to care which funding source you're using, you just care about getting your project funded. And what flavor or what color of funding that we use is sort of almost irrelevant as long as you get the money, right? So we've handled that as a programming decision. So when we work the LAP committee, we'll usually talk to them about here's how much money we believe we're going to have across those funding sources, and we'll set that modal investment mix and the total size of the pot, right? But it is available for every year once the federal government releases it. What Alex was saying was because they've been operating until recently under a continuing resolution, they won't tell us the full amount for federal 26. Transportation now is fully funded for the year, so we're able to see those numbers as they've released it. What happened with the LAP program this year was when the agendas were going, that agenda cycle was ahead of that information being released. Between then and the final board action, we saw that information and said, oh, okay, we feel more comfortable because we have those high scoring projects being able to do that. Typically, the process would be this spring, we'd be looking at what the size of the pie would be for next year's call for projects. And we would set that based on what we're seeing from those numbers. So we'd know that on the front end. It's just with that continuing resolution, this go around, we just didn't know what those numbers would be. So we do anticipate that for next year's call for projects, we'd be probably at somewhere around 30 to 35 million as the size of the total pie. But we do get that information at certain points in the process by funding source. But just to be clear for everyone, when you come into the LAP program, you're asking for federal support for a project. You're not applying for CMAQ funding or STP funding or TAP funding. Again, most of the members have said, ultimately, we really don't care whether we get CMAQ or STP funding. We just want the money. And so we will go and program across the different projects that have scored well to maximize the use of those funds. Does that make sense?
So within the last couple of months, we have a new assistant manager in the region who happened to see on a listserv that a town at the beach was building a sidewalk with carbon reduction funding. And then they call our staff and say, hey, how do I get some of that carbon reduction funding? I'm like, well, don't worry about carbon reduction funding. You're submitting a sidewalk project to LAP. And maybe it gets funded through carbon reduction. Maybe it gets funded through TAP. Maybe it gets funded through CMAQ. You don't have to worry about that. You just submit a project for LAP.
So the alternative, the way it used to be, was we would be sending out calls for projects multiple times a year. There'd be overlapping deadlines and overlapping requirements, and everyone was very, very confused about what they were, what kind of money they were going for, when all they really wanted to do was get their project funded. So when we created the LAP program, we made that a whole lot simpler for the local jurisdictions. You're just coming in to ask for money. You're doing it at one point during the year. It's very, very repetitive. It's very easy to understand. In August, most likely the board is going to open the call for projects. In October, you're going to have your deadline to submit your project. And in the January, February timeframe, the board is going to tell you what they're funding, right? It makes it a lot easier for you all, a lot more straightforward. And then it makes Alex and his staff really sit there and try to figure out, how does the money go the furthest?
And that never misses a CMAQ opportunity or anything like that. It all works out.
Yeah, we're actually, we tend to be a little bit ahead on the CMAQ funding deadlines. Yeah.
So I have a question about maybe some of the requirements for some of those funding pools. Like, let's say you have one that's ABC, another that's DEF, another one that's XYZ, and we submit a project and it checks, C, E, and Y. It's like, okay, this is our project, can you get us the funding? But it doesn't meet certain requirements by some of those funding sources. I guess the question is there any sort of work that's done to maybe tailor the projects if you guys know that you're probably going to get this sort of funding, you'd work with the town staff to kind of guide it or develop the project in such a way that y'all know that it's going to be best served with this funding. But that, at the elected official level, we don't necessarily need to know that. Those specifics.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest that we come to that. So first I'll say the most restrictive funding, the types of projects tend to be bicycle and pedestrian projects, that'd be our TAP funding. We get far more, there's far more need out there than we have available from that funding source. So for the bicycle and pedestrian projects, we are going to fund those with TAP funding first. And then the remainder, we're going to use our STP funding or CMAQ funding to fund that. Again, from your perspective, the additional requirement there is that we are required to have a competitive process to fund for TAP funding, whereas STP funding, it doesn't necessarily have to be competitive or data driven, right? Now our overall program is competitive, so it meets that requirement. For CMAQ funding, the additional requirement is on demonstrating the improvement to air quality, right? So if we determine that we're going to use CMAQ funding on a project, and go back to that agency, to that local government, and say, hey, we're looking to use CMAQ funding on your project. We're going to need you to fill out this additional information and do a calculation, right? But because we use a competitive process, we are programming the projects generally in rank order, unless the board decides to do something different. So not getting too far down the LAP training, there's a LAP training, by the way, that Alex said is the initial training is about 3 hours, right? Then we also have a pretty robust training. If your project is selected, the person who's actually going to manage the project for you is required to go to that. Not someone else from your staff, we'll just send somebody. That doesn't work. Whoever your project manager is has to go to that training because it is a very complex process, right? Just federal funding. If you want to build a sidewalk, it's almost the same thing as if you wanted to build an interstate highway, in terms of the rules and requirements. Which sounds silly, but that's just the way it is, right? And that funding, the STP funding, we could literally use it to go build a new interstate or to go build a new sidewalk. That's how flexible it is.
Yeah.
So we do try to make that as simple as we can for you all. If anyone really wants to get down into the weeds of the nuances of what's eligible or not for certain funding sources, we are happy to talk to you about that all day. Let's schedule some time. Alex will love to sit down with you and talk to you about it. I would too, actually. But the point is, yes, there are specific rules and eligibilities for those things. But over the years, what we've heard is ultimately local jurisdictions don't care about those rules. They just want the money to do the thing you want to do, right? So we go through the effort along with our partners at NCDOT to match the projects up with the funding we have available. And again, we will burn through the TAP money and the CMAQ money way before we run out of the projects, and we end up with those types of projects being also funded with our STP funding as well.
All right, I think unless there's more questions, we're ready for a break.
That says 15 minutes, but I think we're going to try and keep it to 5 minutes so that we can get you all out of here by noon. Okay.
Please, quick hygiene, grab some coffee. Right back.
Is this area that's on the screen going through its rapid development here?
Yep.
Anyone? Anyone, Jennifer? Anyone? So this one was Wake Forest. Okay, so we are in the home stretch here. We're going to talk a little bit about transit now and hope to get you out of here by noon, maybe a couple minutes after. We will also be available after the session for anybody that has any remaining questions that you want to talk about. So for public transportation, the MPO has several roles and responsibilities that come to us from the federal perspective. And we also have a lot of responsibilities that come to us just from local things that are going on. So we're going to talk about some of each of those things. So we have in our region what's called a coordinated public transportation and human services transportation plan. This is a plan that is required in order for the region to utilize a flavor of federal transit funding that comes from Section 5310 funding, and that is for elderly and disabled populations to access public transportation and access transportation services to meet their needs in the community. So in order to utilize that funding in the region, we have to have what's called our Public Transportation and Human Services Coordinated Plan. Campo does manage that plan for the Campo region. We work with the city of Raleigh, who manages the funding for the 5310 program in order to make sure that we have achievable goals and recommendations for that coordination work that happens in the region. We also just do funding sub-allocation work that we work with our transit partners to determine how much public transportation funding from all the different sections of funding, the Section 5303 and 5307 and 5339, all these different types of transit funding that can come to our region for a variety of public transportation purposes. Those funds are based on some factors that just exist in our region, our population, the vehicle miles that our transit services are providing, population in the region that is low income or disabled. All of these factors go into it, and all of the areas or agencies providing public transportation input their transit data into a national transit database that gets funneled upward to the federal government. They churn those numbers around and use that to allocate funding to our region, and then the MPO calculates the numbers back out in an agreed upon formula to figure out who's getting the different pieces and parts of that funding in the region. We also have a public transportation element to our metropolitan transportation plan, as well as work with our public transportation agencies to make sure that the projects that they are working on and doing are identified in that Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, as well as the state's Transportation Improvement Program as well, so that those projects can keep moving forward. We do special studies for public transportation. We recently did a study for Northern Harnett County at their request to look at what kind of, there's a lot of fixed route public transportation in Wake County now due to the Wake County transit tax and the transit program that we have in Wake County. Harnett County saw an opportunity to maybe plug into that. They're rapidly growing in that area as well. Thought there might be some opportunities for them to engage in some public transportation services. So they asked us for some help with that. We went through a 2-year study. About half of that was doing some robust public engagement and asking the folks that live and work there how they want to get around, where they're going, how they might like to travel. We came out with some recommendations for microtransit service for them and are continuing to help them along the path towards implementing something like that in the area. So we do studies like that at the request of our local governments, as well as through our Wake Transit program. So we have 2 speakers in this section that are going to talk to you. First, we have Sarah Keach, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about our mobility management program. This is a new program that was a recommendation from our last locally coordinated human services public transportation plan. So we created the program here at Campo, hired a full-time mobility manager. That's Sarah. She's going to tell you about that program. And then she's going to pass it over to Ben Howell to talk to you a little bit more about our Wake Transit program. There is a full Wake Transit kind of 101 training session that exists also. So there's a lot more detail about Wake Transit in that program, but we wanted to give you some of that today as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah.
Good morning, everybody. Like Shelby said, my name is Sarah Keach, and I am the mobility manager for the Campo region. So let's see, mobility management is connecting people with disabilities, seniors, and low-income individuals to reliable and accessible transportation options. We do this with working with the different transit and human service agencies within the Campo area. And we will use non-emergency medical transportation, paratransit, microtransit, volunteer driver services, and more. So as Shelby said, this was a recommendation of the locally coordinated plan, and it was started in the year 2024. As a recommendation from the mobility management implementation study. A few things about the program. We use it as kind of a one-stop shop for information. So currently we're using a website that has all of the information that anyone might need. So we communicate with local transit agencies, human service agencies, elected and local officials, as well as the general public. So we do that information on the website, and currently we're also looking into the different human service agencies to be able to get information out to the public without needing to use a website, because not everyone is able to use a website. We also disseminate education and information for awareness of transportation information in the region. So that includes, again, not just public information for the general public, but also for leadership and local officials so that they can understand kind of the issues that are coming up when it comes to the lack of public transportation that is needed for these populations. Let's see, we also coordinate with transit and human service agencies, as I said before. That way they can work together to kind of realize what those gaps and overlaps are in service. And if you have any questions or need any more information, you can email me at sarah.keach or sarah.keach@campo-unc.us. And I will kick it over to Ben Howell for Wake Transit.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the Wake Transit program. So as you can see on the screen, the Wake Transit plan was initially drafted and presented to the community in 2015. We were able to get the plan adopted and the sales tax approved in 2016. And then we had our first work plan or what we call our yearly budget for Wake Transit, the work plan. And that first yearly budget was adopted in 2017. The Wake Transit Plan consists of 4 big moves. We aim to connect the region, connect all Wake County communities, create frequent, reliable urban mobility, and enhance access to transit. And under each of those 4 big moves, all of the investments that we fund through Wake Transit fall under those big moves. For more information, you can visit that website linked on the bottom of the presentation slide here to see the plan and find out more information about the big moves. For the Wake Transit program itself, we have what we call a governance ILA or interlocal agreement that was signed at the beginning of Wake Transit by Wake County, Campo, and Go Triangle. And each of the 3 parties have specific duties and responsibilities laid out in that ILA. For most of the Wake Transit things that go on, we have Campo and Go Triangle are what are our governing boards. So both the Campo Executive Board and the Go Triangle Board of Trustees have to approve the annual budgets or those work plans, as well as our major plans that I'll get into. And then Wake County is there to provide to participate in the processes and provide advice as needed. And then we do have we do have situations sometimes where the Wake County will come in as an arbitrator if there's some issues that may not be solved between the 2 governing parties. For the decision-making structure, as I said, we have our 2 governing boards, which are the Campo Executive Board and the Go Triangle Board of Trustees. As a recommending or advisory board, we have our Wake County Transit Planning Advisory Committee, which is made up of professional staff from around Wake County and the transit agencies. And then that TPAC, our Transit Planning Advisory Committee, also has 2 subcommittees that they've developed that meet monthly as well to work on items that then usually flow up to the TPAC. And then for certain issues or concerns, we will develop what we call work groups that are even smaller than the committees to work on very specific items. We also use those work groups as opportunities to bring in outside experts as needed. The TPAC has a number of core responsibilities, top of which is really the work plan, which is an annual investment strategy that lays out how we are going to spend our Wake Transit money every year. Just as a guide, our draft FY26 work plan, which will be out next week, we're anticipating that work plan to be approximately $180 million. Most of our yearly work plans are usually float anywhere between about $160 million to just over $200 million. And that includes all the operations as well as capital projects that are funded through Wake Transit. And as you can see on this slide there's a number of other things that go into building that work plan. A little bit more information about our core plans. So we have our Wake Transit Plan, which is our 10-year plan. We sometimes will call it our vision plan. We just completed the 2035 transit plan, which was adopted in November. So that will guide our Wake Transit investments from now until 2035. We are getting ready to start our bus plan, which is, again, a 10-year plan that follows the transit plan. And the bus plan is what we oftentimes refer to that as our bus implementation element of our transit plan. So it focuses in on the bus services that are laid out in the transit plan and provides more detail. One of the things that comes out of that bus plan is what we call our short-range transit plans for each provider in Wake County that guide when new bus services will be put into service. Those short-range transit plans usually cover 3 to 5 years. And then, of course, we have our yearly work plan, which is our budget. Through all of these core plans, we also have a guiding community engagement policy that guides how we communicate this information to the public and interact with the public to get feedback on these items. So our transit plan, like I said, has 10-year horizon. So we have our original transit plan that was adopted in 2016. We adopted our first update to the transit plan in 2021 that just added 3 years. Our initial plan spanned 2018 to 2017. Our 2021 update just took that from 2027 to 2030. And then we adopted our newest update in November to take that timeline from 2030 to 2035. Moving forward, again, approximately every 4 years following roughly the timeline of the MTP, we will be adopting a new Wake Transit plan that will continue to push that horizon out another 5 years. For the 2035 transit plan, we outlined, again, our 4 big moves. You can see on the screen there some of the proposed investments under those 4 big moves we anticipate to work on or complete over the next 10 years. And then you can see our projected revenue and how we will be spending that money. So for our 2035 plan, we anticipate that we will have approximately $3 billion to spend over that 10-year period. That includes money that we currently have in the bank and projects we're currently working on, as well as new money. For the Wake bus plan, again, we have a 2030 Wake bus plan that was adopted in 2023. We're getting ready to start development of our 2035 Wake bus plan that will lay out how the bus element of the 2035 transit plan will be implemented. Bus service and other operating expansion projects include introducing new bus services or bus routes, increasing frequency or extending hours of operations. We also look at capital projects as part of the bus plan, such as new passenger facilities, new and upgraded vehicles, and vehicle maintenance facilities. Another important piece of our Wake Transit plan is a community funding area program that was developed with the very first Wake Transit plan, and that was developed as a way to provide Wake Transit funding to all the outlying communities that at that time did not currently have bus service. So when we first developed the Wake Transit plan, really Raleigh and Cary were the 2 primary bus operators in the region, with Go Triangle providing some regional service. And since this was a countywide plan, we wanted to ensure a way to flow some of that transit money and those transit investments to the outlying communities like Fuquay-Varina, Holly Springs, Garner, Wake Forest, Rollsville. And that's how we do that through the community funding area. Initially, when we developed the community funding area, we programmed roughly $2 million a year, give or take, towards that program in the first couple versions of the plan. In the 2035 update, we have greatly increased the funding for the community funding area to roughly $6 million a year, aiming for about a $60 million program over the course of that 10-year period. So just to give a brief overview of the funding sources for Wake Transit plan, again, we have our half-cent sales tax that's countywide. We have a portion of the regional vehicle rental tax. You can see a footnote on the slide there about the vehicle rental tax. There's some discussion about that and whether that will stay in the plan or not, or how much that may stay in the plan. But currently, we do have that funding there. We also have funding from a $7 county vehicle registration fee, funding from a $3 increase to the regional vehicle registration fee, and then we get state and federal support for transit investments. And then you can see on the other side of the slide, the revenue assumptions for FY26, which is our current work plan. We assume that we'll have about $145 million of sales tax revenue, roughly $10 million of the 2 vehicle registration tax revenues, and then additional 31 million plus in other revenue sources to equal about $186.5 million. Also wanted to point out, we do have a Wake Transit performance tracker. That's online at waketransittracker.com. You can go on there and see how we have done over the last roughly 10 years or so. We update that tracker about at least once a year, showing all the new routes that have been put in place, as well as how those routes have performed. We show how many miles of frequent service or service that is every 15 minutes, how we're doing on that. We have over 99 miles of frequent service operating within Wake County right now. We are hoping to get that closer to about 300 miles by the end of the 2035 plan. So again, go check out the Wake Transit Tracker. We are also working on doing a broader update to the tracker this year and hope to produce a new tracker sometime this summer. And then finally, just some the main websites, the Campo website with the Wake Transit Plan. We also have a waketransit.org website, which is where we are doing all of our public engagement and all of our notices. Go to that website. Again, we are starting work on our 2035 Wake Transit bus plan. We are expecting our first engagement phase to begin in around May of this year. And then we are planning to have a Wake Transit 101 session in June that will go into much, much detail. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. All right, thank you.
All right, well, I am going to close this out for everyone, and I am the last thing between you and lunch. You've heard a lot of information. Hopefully it wasn't like a streaming fire hose, but it was a fire hose worth of information today. And I'm sure some of you maybe are, hopefully none of you are turned off completely. Maybe a lot of you I need to digest, and then I'm going to have questions. We encourage you to contact us early and often when you do have questions or ideas, and we're more than happy to sit down and talk with you about that. But what we want to close out with here are a couple of examples of where ideas were turned into reality and where the planning process resulted in tangible things happening and improvements happening. So couple of things on the front end of this. Our role is the regional transportation planning and coordination, and ultimately, if it's going to be non-local funding, it's the funding decisions, right? So all the transportation projects, they've got to comply with the federal and state process, the regulations and that are out there. If it's state funding, it's got to comply with SEPA for environmental review. If it's federal funding, it's got to comply with NEPA, or that National Environmental Policy Act, to ensure that there will be no adverse impact to the environment. So having said all that, we kind of are going to do this with two different kind of examples. Small projects, those are things that are maybe $10 million or less. And then larger projects, those things that are more than $10 million. So smaller projects, they are going to go, sorry, okay. That shifted on me and I thought I advanced the slide there. Smaller projects, those are going to be the things that will typically go through our LAP program. They still have to be in our MTP, our regional transportation plan. They still have to go into the TIP, but they're going to flow through our LAP program. That might be a small widening. It might be an operational improvement, maybe a greenway or a sidewalk improvement, bus stop improvements, that sort of thing. So an example of that, town of Morrisville, the Airport Boulevard Extension Project. The project there was to construct an extension of Airport Boulevard that would complete that corridor that was envisioned by the town and by the region. This was submitted through the LAP program over multiple funding cycles. So if you didn't catch on to it when Alex was talking about that, you're not submitting to the LAP program for a project that you want to construct 3 or 4 years from now. You're submitting for the activity you need to do on that project in the year that we have the funding for it, right? So you might only be coming to ask for design money 1 year, or property acquisition money, or construction, or maybe multiple phases, right? So this particular project went through the LAP program for a couple of years, getting different things accomplished, and ultimately in 2022, in that funding cycle, the town partnered with NCDOT, who actually is constructing and managing the project. The town's putting up the local match, right? So in our LAP program, we have the federal funds. It still requires non-federal match on those funds. And what you can see there in the pie chart is this particular project had 60% federal funds, 40% local match on the project, right? So a pretty strong, financial commitment from the town to get this done. But the one thing I really like about this example is it has everybody do what they're good at, right? The town coming up with some local money, NCDOT going out and building a road, right? And it's not that the town doesn't know how to build a road, but for a big project, I think everyone recognized that in this particular case, NCDOT was the best suited entity to deliver the project, and the town was able to bring up the money that was needed. Another example of a small project is in Rollsville. So in 2018, Campo conducted a corridor study of the US 401 corridor through the town of Rollsville. This was, for those of you who don't know, there was a bypass built and opened. And so the idea here was what should happen to the old 401 or business 401. So we did a corridor study that ultimately we now call it Main Street, right, rather than US 401. And that was really at the heart of the study. How do you take this corridor that was viewed by many as the highway to get to Raleigh, or to get to points outside of the Chonga region, and make it a main street? And so that came up with a lot of recommendations to make that happen. Ultimately, Rollsville came in and submitted 2 different projects into the LAP program, Burlington Mills Road Realignment and the Main Street Complete Corridor Improvement Project. And so it's a really good example of how we go from planning something and figuring out what we need to do to solve a problem to getting it funded and constructed and implemented in a pretty short time frame. And you might say, well, you did that back in 2018, and maybe some of that's just opening in the last couple of years. That's a long time. If you haven't figured out from all the other information, especially the spot part of this, getting something done in a 5 to 10 year window is light speed when it comes to transportation projects. So I do like to really point that one out. That is, again, something where we started from scratch and we had things on the ground within about 6 or 7 years, which is pretty quick for transportation. Moving on to the large project examples. These are things that are going to be more than $10 million. These are generally larger and what are considered regionally significant projects. So they do require full project development. They require full air quality conformity. They are absolutely going to be in the MTP as a specific project that's called out. You'll have a project ID. You'll see it on the map if it's, say, a roadway project. They also have to be in the TIP and in the STIP. All of those documents, as Shelby was talking to you, have to match. And generally, these are projects that are going through the SPOT process, the statewide prioritization process. So any questions on that? And that's any number of projects that are going on right now. The interchange improvements happening near the airport, the widening project on I-40 in Wake and Johnston counties, the US 1 project north of Raleigh going towards Wake Forest, US 64 through Cary and Apex. All of those are really good examples of large projects and how they work through the process. Those tend to take longer because they're much more impactful projects. They take a lot more design and they tend to be a lot more expensive. Any questions about any of those? All right, so how do you make this happen, particularly for the smaller projects? Or if you know you have a problem, but you don't have a solution for the problem yet, you go through our one call for all. So every fall, really summer, in August, we open up the one call for all. And that's where you come to Campo and you submit your LAP projects. You also submit your study ideas. So if you have an intersection problem or a corridor issue or an area of your community where there's a transportation problem, and you know there's a problem, but you don't know exactly what the problem is, or you don't know exactly how to solve the problem, this is when you come to us and we will go do a study. You'll have a LAP project, something like that. So that typically happens each year starting in August and ending in October. And then we'll put that together into our budget and work program and start working on the solution. Another thing, and we are almost at the end here. I know we're a little bit past noon, but at the beginning of this, I said, your success in Campo is largely dependent on your participation. And you can tell from the training today, if you think about college course structure, right, this is the 100 level class. That's why we call it Campo 101. Well, getting into the 200, 300, 400, 500 level classes, you can see some of those on the screen. There are other periodic trainings that we do. one specifically on, or multiple ones specifically on our regional plan development, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan 101 or alternatives analysis. There's a Wake Transit Program 101 as well, employment analyst, the Triangle Regional Model, or as we've mentioned several times, the various trainings for the LAP program. Those are all things that you or your staff or other elected officials are encouraged to participate in to better understand how to be successful with transportation planning and project implementation here in the region. You can see on there we've got some of these trainings, the older trainings, the videos online, even some of the slide decks. I will tell you that certain trainings are mandatory each year, like the LAP program. Trying to see if we have anybody that jumps out in my mind here in the room who you may have, your town may get LAP funding every single year. Your staff or you are going to that LAP training every single year because something is changing about the federal rules for that funding. So there's always something changing. There's always something new to keep you up to date on what's happening. And that is the end of our slides. I think, yeah, that really is it. So we want to thank you all for coming today and being with us in person and online. Our staff will be here the rest of the day, so you are welcome to hang out, talk to us about projects, ask questions about what you learned today or things you didn't learn today but you're interested in. We're here till 5, and you guys are welcome to as well, or we are officially done though with the trainings. So thank you very much.